us up here in a sec.
Now I really need a vacation.
Yeah, I know. You come back exhausted, right? You realize coming home's the best vacation. The best relief is that, I'm back. We still need a Galapagos report.
Great. That was great, huh?
It was great. That's the short version.
Yeah, good.
Still lots of really cool.
Yeah. Okay, we're on. Hi, everybody. This is Tuesday, August 20th. It's the Board of Commissioners work session. And we're starting today with the Agricultural Building Review Committee update and discussion with Suzanne Wolf and Joanna Schaffner. Welcome.
Thanks, Greg. We want to introduce ourselves because you
Just did. I know,
Good.
sorry.
That makes it easy.
Took away your thunder.
So this is just sort of a long overdue touch base with you all about the Agricultural Building Review Committee that was created in 2011 when we adopted amendments to the land use code related to agricultural buildings. And we changed what we exempt from the calculation of floor area, and we dealt with barns and hay structures and what are all the other types? Equipment buildings, loafing sheds, all of those things. We created a bunch of exemptions. And at the time, one of the issues staff had in reviewing things, sometimes we'd actually, maybe to back up, is Joanna provided this awesome background for you, which I won't go through, but the history of kind of where we've been with ag buildings, I found pretty interesting, because I think the deal was, once upon a time, everybody knew what an ag building was. It was a functional building for agriculture. And over time, as things shifted, here in Pitkin County, that shifted. And so over time, we've sort of played with the regulations and how do we keep ag buildings as ag buildings and not being used for all sorts of other things. Because as we made floor area more restrictive in certain ways, then people would then go, well, I could still have a barn. I'm going to use my barn to, I think one you'd had years ago was storing scuba equipment or something. Again, it becomes a storage building and it's not agricultural. So that's, the very short version of a lot of background of how we've come to regulate agricultural buildings and try and keep them used for agricultural activities. So when we did those amendments in 2011 and made specifics about what a barn could have in it and what an ag equipment storage building could be and all of those things, one of the issues we'd had was sometimes we'd get a barn and go, we can look at plans, but we're not horse people or cow people or, don't deal with hay. We don't know as much, and there are people out there who might know more about what you need. Is this building really functional? Does it do what you say it's going to do? If it's an ag building, is it really designed so you can store hay or you can house your animals or whatever, or is it really going to be a party barn? That was always the one thing everybody talked about was the party barn. So this committee was created at that time in the code to assist us in reviewing building permit applications, basically site plan applications. And then anybody who was asking for, there's a way in the code to, if you're allowed a certain amount of exempt square footage for your ag building, if you can make a really good argument as to why you need more because you have a legitimate operation and here's what's going on, there was an administrative process where we could approve additional exempt square footage. And we figured that they might be helpful in those circumstances. So we started out and used them, and Joanna was really the staff person who worked with them, reviewed a number of applications. And in the end, the committee was a little bit like, who are we to tell people, how, if somebody has a really nice, Joanna kept talking about a really nice tack room, might be very large, might have a lot of really beautiful tack. Who are we to say, well, no, it should be smaller? Why do you need so much room for your tack? Or why do you, again, in the end, they were kind of like, we don't really feel like we're
Doesn't have a bar.
helping much. Well, right. Again, those pieces were kind of clear. We could get there. But then in terms of the amenities that someone might have for their horses versus what I might have for my horse if I had, again, could be different. And there was nothing that it was still being used for that purpose. So anyway, so we haven't really used the committee in a number of years. I don't think we've ever had the full number of members we're supposed to have by the bylaws, which is 5. Again, when you were meeting, I think, you did have, active members who did participate. But over time, it's just kind of drifted away a little bit. So here we are. And again, we'd sort of anticipated, I think, several years ago about starting this conversation, and it's just one of those things that keeps getting pushed off. So we're finally here. But again, at the time, one of the committee members had provided some pretty specific comments about why he felt uncomfortable about what they were reviewing and how effective they were. So that's where some of this language comes through and sort of the discussion about, are there other ways to make them more effective? And so that would be one approach if we want to keep a committee to advise us, what else could they be looking at? We'd have to give them a different charge, I think, in the code to give them some more substance to what they're reviewing. And again, I just think to note really that it was a very limited scope that this committee was given. It was just really, you're reviewing an agricultural building, and is it being designed to do what they're saying it's going to do. It wasn't sort of a broader scope of, supporting agriculture. Again, it's very limited. So again, I think the short version of the discussion we'd like to have is, if we think this committee could be useful and that's still something we're looking for, then I think we need to rethink what their charge is. Otherwise, we kind of feel like we're not sure that it's that useful to us to have this committee advising us. There have been ag buildings permitted in the last number of years. Joanna's reviewing those and Larissa, going through those and making sure they meet those. But again, those discussions with the ag committee always kind of ended up in, well, it works. So then they'd end up getting permitted, and we just created sort of another step in the process that doesn't seem that useful to us or the people who are working on those. The other piece in that, so I guess in the end, I think our thought was more, maybe this just isn't a useful committee. We have to staff it. We'd have to rethink what does the code say? What is their charge? Maybe it's easier in the end to just say, we tried that. Maybe that just didn't really work. That's not what we need. We do always have, we are recording covenants on all of these agricultural buildings that use an exemption. Maybe that's a different avenue, is to, look at more, should we be doing more compliance type work and checking to go, right, are people really, there's a covenant recorded against your property, we have the right to go inspect, can you show us that this is actually functioning for what it's intended to function as. So anyway, that's kind of the quick version. If you have questions for us, and again, Joanna definitely has more of that on the ground experience with sitting in meetings with the committee, and actually Steve does, I guess, as well. You were on the committee at one point, so anyway, we're happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I was on the very first committee when it was first formed, and then for maybe a year, then I ran for Board of County Commissioners, so I had to resign from the committee, but I could tell then, right when it was first formed, that there wasn't a whole lot of work to do for the committee. It was very limited scope. What I would like us to explore is the possibility of expanding what this committee would do. Actually, the Building Review Committee would be disbanded, but in its place, I think we should consider having an agricultural advisory committee that would have a much broader scope of things that they could weigh in on. One example is they could advise Open Space and Trails and the BOCC on the leasing of the ag land that the county owns. That would be just one example of an additional responsibility. Years ago, there was a committee that Ellen Sassano was the staff person who headed up, an agricultural advisory committee. It was a sort of a term-limited kind of a thing, and I served on that committee, and I don't even remember what year. It was a bunch of years ago. We met at Basalt High School, the old Basalt High School, which is now the middle school, and I think if we could kind of resurrect what that committee was doing, and if we can find records of the different things we were discussing, that could provide some information on possible things that an ag committee could do.
Yeah, and
I'm not in favor
I
of doing an ag committee if it doesn't really have any good purpose.
And I remember that, Stephen. I guess what I don't remember is sort of what was that committee advising towards? Were we working on changes to the code? You know, again, I remember that was,
Yeah.
or was it master planning at the time? I'm not
And
sure.
I can't remember at all.
And I do think, I mean, again, as opposed to, I guess, this type of appointed committee, you know, it was kind of an ad hoc, you know,
Yeah,
definitely
absolutely.
advisory group. But yeah, so a different format, I guess, definitely.
So that's what I would do, is investigate that, and then we could consider whether we'd want to change the committee into that. And I think there'd be a broader interest in the whole community of people wanting to serve on a broader agricultural committee, one of whose responsibilities could be reviewing barn and ag building things when they do come up.
George?
Yeah, I think I recall, and this was precipitated by the Snowmass caucus, when we were looking at FARs and size of barns as relationship to acreage lots. And so that committee was set up to help come up with some recommendations to staff and finally to the BOCC, how to look at allowing different ratios of barn sizes to lots. And that's where that committee was set up. And
There was actually another one way
even
farther
before
back
that,
than
but that was the last
Yeah.
one. And that was really successful. But I don't really see, I agree with staff. Looking at the notes, the Ag Building Review Committee met 5 times between 2011 and 2014, reviewed 15 applications, 14 were approved, 1 greenhouse was denied. I think staff has the ability, just through your permitting process, building permit, and Joanne in terms of enforcement, to ensure that the ag buildings actually fit to code and are utilizing what they're meant to be used for. And I don't think open space, and you can ask Open Space and Trails Board, but I'm not sure that they would want to have yet another committee weighing in on their work. It's just one more thing for them to have to deal with. So unless there's a really clear case of a need, and it seems like you've probably talked to most of the current committee members.
Most of these current ones, I have never even attended a meeting. You know,
Yeah.
again, they've sort of, again, we've still sort of done this, we need members, again, it's just.
Right, so we've disbanded committees in the past when we've felt, or the board has felt that they're really no longer really needed, and there's no sense having a committee just for the sake of a committee. There's always opportunities for the public to weigh in on any particular issue and bring it forth to staff and to the BLCC.
Anybody else? Patty?
Is there any, I think, I agree with George and with Steve as far as looking at, I'm on, but it's not close. Looking at whether or not Open Space and Trails could utilize the committee for any weighing in on master plans or management plans on any of the properties. But what about healthy rivers and streams and how much involvement they may have with water rights and agricultural water rights, irrigation rights that we're using on open space? I don't know. It's just worth asking both of those, I think, to see if they'd see any benefit or any need. And it might be, again, another committee we create that never has a meeting. So we need to be careful of that. We don't want to just continue what we're trying to deal with. So I think it'd be worth asking them and then bringing it back to us. If they say they have some interest, then we can pick some brains and maybe come back to us with some thoughts.
Kelly?
Well, and I guess along those lines, one of the specific questions that I think would be helpful for a public board to answer would be something related to valuation of agricultural production on ag easement properties. I guess without a ton of familiarity of it, my understanding is that there's not really an assigned requirement of producing certain levels of value of product on lands that we have given an easement for.
So on the county owned.
Yeah, something along those lines.
I don't think we've ever even talked about that. Mostly it's just using those lands to be just health and maintaining the soil and the noxious weeds and the water rights, but might be worth asking them if they have any interest in seeing where we can go.
Seems to me that staff has pretty much been handling this. I'm not sure there's a need for the committee, and I'd actually love to disband committees every now and then just to demonstrate that we are paying attention and we can, rather than build more. If it's not helping, we don't really need them. They're not feeling useful. Certainly, let's disband it, is my feeling. And it seems that staff has got a handle on this. And yeah, if it comes back to us through the agricultural leasing program or something else, then something else to consider. But that hasn't happened yet, so I don't want to make something that isn't needed. A solution in search of a problem. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would say if we don't create an ag committee or morph this into an ag committee, then I would say to disband this committee and just have it be administrative review on things that could come to us if it's a controversial thing that has to be decided.
I think for us, I think that it would be a disbanding, because we would basically remove this from the land use code. It's created as a committee under the land use code, so I think we'd need to take that sort of formal step. And then, then the other, looking at the other opportunities, I guess.
If some vulnerability reveals itself, we can address it at that time.
So I guess we're saying we want staff to bring back a resolution removing this from the land use code. I'm just gonna turn it off and scream, so removing it from the land use code.
Great,
Got it.
thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So Patty, I can hear you really well with the T-coil, even though you
Yeah.
can be that far away from your mic. I can hear you really well, but maybe Amy can't.
I hear a booming in the room. Do you hear
Oh,
that
it's
boom?
annoying.
Yeah. Okay, up next, Solid Waste Center budget discussion, and they're here. Kathy and Brian are in the house.
Great. Presentation in there. Excellent. Well, Kathy's loading that. We do have a couple announcements for the board before we dive into the topic of discussion, just to keep you abreast of what's going on at the landfill. A lot of changes out there and interesting issues. So Kathy's firing that up.
Pre and presentation announcements.
Yeah.
How exciting.
We're drilling a water well as we speak today, so hopefully that will all go well in the well.
How deep is it? Do we know yet? Or is that what we're trying to find out?
I think they hit water at 70 feet, and we're going a little deeper than that just to ensure we're there. And we do not know the production yet, nor the quality. So we'll find out hopefully in the next week.
There must be something wrong with all of our mics
Are your
today.
mics on?
They're all on. That's on. Let's try this.
Maybe there's something wrong in the room that's not getting the
That's on.
amplification.
That's on.
Okay, let's give it a shot.
Keep going.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, a couple things are, we had our annual state Colorado Department of Environmental Health inspects the landfill annually. Clean inspection, no violations. That also included the compost operation. Perfectly in compliance. They were very impressed with it, actually. So that's good news. And then just a little plug for our minimalism movie screening coming up Wednesday, September 18th at the Wheeler Opera House in the evening. We're going to talk about how, our overconsumption of things is really impacting our environment and the landfill and our lives. So be a follow-up panel discussion after the movie. So encourage everybody to
great.
attend.
Great. So really the topic of this discussion is really two of our primary diversion programs at the landfill, or hopefully will be, is construction and demolition debris and recycling. And the reason we're bringing these to you outside of the budget process is we need to make sure that we're kind of heading the right direction for the board to put these stakes in the ground in order to create our landfill budget. So this is not the final time you're going to see this. You will see it again in the 2020 budget process. But part of the reason we're here is we like our diversion programs to kind of pay for themselves, like our mattress diversion or household hazardous waste. As we know, recycling is heavily subsidized, but it is going to be more heavily subsidized in the future based on costs. With regard to construction and demolition debris, we're looking to incentivize people to sort so we can dispose of those more properly and divert what we can at the landfill based on existing programs. So Kathy's put together a nice slideshow to try to inform the board so that we can make good budget decisions this year and set our 2020 budget moving forward.
Okay, so landfill tip fees, that's what we charge at the gate. It's the per ton rate to dispose of materials at the landfill. We've been following the past few years the Boulder Denver Greeley Consumer Price Index, which has averaged about 2.7% over the last 3 years. And why do we do this? We keep the landfill rates in line with inflation, so we're not making big increases like waiting 10 years and hit people with a big increase. This is very gentle, allows customers of the landfill to budget if they've got a big project going on. But this year's a little different. Like Brian said, we got some changes coming that are pretty significant that we just wanted to touch base with you before we get too far down the rabbit hole of budgeting, and so Connie can have an idea of what to bring back to you in probably November. I believe we're up. Construction and demolition debris is the first topic we're going to talk about. We've discussed this many times before. Construction demo debris is 58% of the material going into the landfill. It's huge. National average is 20% C&D. So looking up here, this is a chart. We did a visual waste sort back in 2016 of what typical construction demo loads were coming in at. Treated engineered wood drywall are the biggest components of C&D debris, and the rest you can show. Roofing is 13%, concrete 13%, metal 6%, cardboard paper is 2% of construction demolition debris loads. That material we currently recycle at the landfill. We have diversion programs already in place. So we're really looking to start to drive people to get that out of the loads. So we're working on a proposed ordinance. We were here in, I believe it was May 7, 2019, to kind of brief you kind of what the direction we're going with a construction demo diversion ordinance. So what we're looking at right now, and the numbers have changed. We had a meeting with community development last week after the packet was submitted, and we're still a moving target. We're sort of sorting this out in our heads. But we're looking at, and ComDev was like, 25% diversion rate. So we're looking to get people to divert 25% of their loads, and that'll be tied into the permit system through community development. There will be a requirement to put, we're thinking a deposit down and do waste tracking and reporting for Pitkin County construction projects. Maximum pricing for mixed loads, and then they'll have to present a report, waste tracking and a report. We're going to be back on September 20th, I believe, to really go into this C&D diversion program idea that we're putting together.
Hold on.
So I'm just kind of getting a little touch on this.
Yeah, just quickly, because the packet was at 15% diversion. Was that staff's recommendation from the landfill originally?
Yes.
Okay, and so ComDev said 25. So are you comfortable with that? Is that realistic? Is that a realistic target, or?
We think it is. Yeah. I mean, if you start looking at a job where you're diverting concrete and dirt and rock, you could very easily make that.
Okay.
Is that by volume, by mass? How do how do we categorize it, and where can they skim the cream in terms of really making an impact easily? That'll be the first thing they're going to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's by volume. Weighing at the scales at the landfill. If you take your metal down Valley to Trinity Recycling. You'll have to track it through a reporting system, and we're looking at a software that will make it pretty easy to track and input. So it'll all be by weight.
Okay.
How we're gonna do it.
So help me. My neighbor just deconstructed his house.
Mm-hmm.
I have a new door. I have new porch material. But his place was really small. So 25% of his place would be significant versus 25% of a 10,000 square foot house might be easily doable. So again, are we not hitting those small houses harder?
I think we're going to get into that based on a tiered structure for C&D. So,
Thank you.
again, we don't want to get in the nuts and bolts of the ordinance right now. We want to stay with the
That's the
financial
thought I want you to
aspect,
carry forward for
but
me,
we're going to
please.
get to that, Patty.
Yeah,
So
thank
If I
thank you.
could, before you go, just with George's question, is if you propose 50, ComDev came back at 25, it sounds like
15.
you're.
15.
15, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, I thought 50, wow, that's a huge.
No, it's in
thank
their
you.
memo.
Okay, thank you. Just my ears.
ComDev is actually, yeah.
It's a flag.
Yeah, no, they can do it.
Yeah, you're like 50?
Right.
Wait a minute, yeah, okay,
So-
thank you.
The picture there on the slide, that's a typical construction demolition debris load, and you can see in there's cardboard, which we divert, there's paper, there's organics, you see some general single stream recycling. So really, this is what the typical load looks like coming into the landfill, and we're gonna try and change that. So part of the proposed C&D diversion ordinance will be a tiered structure. Now, we can only control what goes on in unincorporated Pitkin County. So we felt the tiered pricing structure will also capture Aspen, snowmass, and everything to keep that diversion, incentive going, even outside of unincorporated Pitkin County. So we're looking at a tiered structure, 4 tiers, and we're basing it on tonnage. So next year, the proposed price increase with CPI, C&D disposal goes up to $91 a ton from $89. So we're looking at 0 to 10 tons. Once you hit your 10 tons, you jump to tier 2, 11 to 20, tier 3, 21 tons and greater. Tier 4 is for if you didn't bother to sort your load at all, you're going to get hit with the max pricing. If you bring in, like that picture before, it's got cardboard and everything else in there, I'm sorry, you didn't make any effort, you're going to pay the max price. We do have some stakeholder meetings coming up scheduled, so we're going to get the public and the construction companies' feedback, and then we'll have that by the time we come back to you for detail. Ran a couple scenarios of actual jobs that occurred in Pitkin County, Aspen. So this is 219 Monarch Street. This job came in this year. So construction demolition debris, they brought in 36.4 tons. So if you did the tiered pricing structure, which we're proposing for next year, that's how the breakout goes down. And the project total would be $3,300. They'd separated out their concrete on this job, had quite a bit of concrete. We're looking at lowering the price of concrete. Right now, concrete disposal is the same as C&D disposal. It's $89 a ton. It would go to $91 a ton. We have a good program now for concrete diversion. We're crushing it, and it's making it into a good saleable product. So to increase incentive to divert, we are recommending to lower concrete by half to $45 a ton. So next year, if Monarch Street had come in and they diverted all that concrete, their concrete disposal would be $3,500 a ton. And then they brought in quite a bit of cover dirt as well, and that's dirt we used to cover the landfill at night. So you can see if they really did a good job, sorted their loads, the total price for their disposal is $9,700. Under our current pricing structure, that very far column, in today's dollars, if we didn't lower the concrete price, it's $13,000. So if you're really good about sorting your C&D, there's savings to be had. Now that kind of middle column towards the end, tier 4, that shows if they didn't do it at all, that job would come in at $11,844. Yeah.
On the concrete, how do you deal with rebar in the concrete?
They have magnets and they'll pull it out manually. So
That's included, they have to remove the rebar.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
That's clean.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we get it down to now 1-inch screened concrete, and it's starting to become a pretty popular seller, and they get that metal out.
Back into concrete, or it goes back into, where does it go?
They're using it on like road fill. Construction projects are required to have like a base layer of rock to clean off tires. A lot of them are using it for that.
It's almost like a washed rock product. It allows drainage very well, but gives a lot of structure.
Doesn't seep high acid from concrete into groundwater or anything? Oh, sure.
It's pretty inert, yeah.
It's, yeah.
Okay. And what about, where does the rebar go?
The rebar goes into our scrap metal recycling.
So it can be scrap metal?
Yes. Yeah, and then a similar scenario, Little Woody Creek job, and it's broken down the same way. So it didn't have much construction damage. It's a smaller job, and you can see the price differences. So if you really do a good job of sorting your materials, construction materials coming in, you can save money over this year's pricing. So really, if you focus on it, it's not going to be a huge burden to the consumer. So we also looked at what it would be to go to South Canyon for a typical construction demolition load, because it's not our intention to drive waste down valley to our neighboring landfill. Again, it took us a 4-ton load. South Canyon charges $68 a ton to dispose of it in the landfill. About a 3-hour at least round trip drive to get all the way down there and back up to Aspen. That disposal cost total with drive and driver and truck time, $632. The same job, $91, they're on the lowest here. They've sorted their loads, 4 tons. It's about an hour round trip out of Aspen to us, back into Aspen, $484. There's still a cost savings to be had there. If you're doing the sorting pretty well, we're not gonna be driving people down valley. However, if you take that same 4-ton load, you don't sort it at all, you're gonna get hit with a $151 ton fee at the landfill to dispose of it. 1 hour drive time, it takes it to $724. So it's a little bit higher if they choose not to sort it than going to South Canyon.
So the South Canyon one would be also unsorted? Is that
Unsorted,
right?
yeah, they don't
Correct.
require
They don't
anything.
have any requirement like that?
Right. However, we feel these jobs, it's not that huge of a difference. They're running trucks. These trucks are running laps. They need to dump and get back quickly and just keep going. So I don't think that $100 difference is really going to be a big driver down to South Canyon. Any questions on C&D and our pricing? We'll get down to the breakdown of kind of how this new pricing structure we estimate in a little bit. Now, recycling. Recycling is changed quite a bit over the last year. China had been in the news multiple times, put a contamination limit of 0.5%. Almost impossible for us to hit. So plastics and mixed paper are not going to China anymore. They're really not going anywhere.
What was that contamination limit before they put this restriction on?
They were averaging about 20% contamination. We, in Pickens County and Aspen, we had an 8% contamination. We were better than the national average. But they were averaging about 20%. So in a typical bale, a ton of plastic needed less than 10 pounds of trash in there before China would take it. So we're going from like 200 pounds of trash to 10 pounds of trash.
So who can recycle plastic at that level these days? Anybody?
Well, domestic markets are limited right now, but they're starting to come online. The
I mean, who
industry-
could send theirs to China at that rate?
Nobody does.
Nobody.
Yeah.
China essentially shut their door on the world.
Interesting.
So it just wasn't us in the U.S. It was everybody. Domestic markets right now are limited. We project in a couple years we're going to start seeing more and more domestic recycling markets come online. We're just going to have to wait it out. We're going to have to tough it out. A lot of communities are stopping single stream recycling. I would not recommend that at all because we have spent years and years to get to where we're at. If we stopped it, we'll never get it started again. And
So what does it mean, Kathy? It's going down to our sorter in Denver, and then they're ultimately putting it into a...
No, they're
Trash bin?
sitting on it, waiting for markets. So they've assured me that they don't trash it. They're doing the best they can to find markets, but they have to pay for extra equipment. They have to pay for extra manpower to get this stuff clean to where they can get it to a market.
Yeah, I don't want to open up a can of worms here, but when you're talking about single stream recycling, all the effort we've done to institute that, two things. One, we're seeing the city go away from that because of the cost to maintain at the Rio Grandes. And also, reports I've been reading is certain products are actually more recyclable than others. And so a lot of communities are just limiting those that they can really have a impact in terms of being able to recycle. So I saw a report the other day that out of all the plastics that get turned into landfills, only about 7% of those plastics are actually recyclable.
Right.
And so are there some products that we should be focusing on versus just single stream that would be more beneficial in terms of what actually can't be recyclable, and also more cost effective for the landfill?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, there are certain things you can do as a consumer when you're buying stuff. Aluminum cans, if you're gonna stop at a gas station on a road trip and get something to drink, buy an aluminum can. Those commodities remain high, they're easily recyclable, they're recycled domestically. Cardboard is another one. We see a lot of cardboard that has a still pretty high commodity value, and then gets that, and then they can break even or make money with that. So yeah, just when we're thinking about, do you need to pick up the newspaper? Maybe not, read it online. I don't know if newspapers want me to say that, but it's just that paper and everything. Just think about what you're buying, because there are certain things that are better, and plastics is one of the worst.
But how does that address my question in terms
Yeah.
of should we be revisiting the single stream and focusing on those products that actually can be
Yeah.
recyclable versus that they're going to end up in another trash landfill somewhere else?
Yeah, sorry about that. So yes, I don't know if we want to take plastics out necessarily, but the Rio Grande is shifting to kind of source separated cardboard, separate glass bin. We're going to look at that as well. Our new waste and recycling ordinance is still single stream. I don't want to get people off of that. However, we're going to start looking at maybe getting a separate glass collection. Still not a big deal if you get glass in your single stream bin, but if I can get restaurants and bars, which they have a glass bin at Rio Grande right now, to get that separated, I can get that directly to a glass market. And we're going to start looking at that to try and decrease the tonnages that are going out of the solid waste center, because I'm going to show you in a minute what it's going up to, just to try and make it be a little smarter about it. So
I guess Patty, go ahead.
Could we also, as part of these great advertisements that we do at the landfill, just maybe highlight what Gorge's saying, think smart and use, like you just said, buy things that are, and just start encouraging people to do that, to get them to think smart. Yeah. And maybe that's something we can, without having to say we're not going to do single stream recycling anymore, but we're going to emphasize these products.
yeah.
Packaging, so important.
One little sideline is I just saw in the news this morning that San Francisco airport is banning all plastic water bottles. I mean, it's one huge chunk of the market to try to eliminate the amount of plastic going into landfills, knowing that only a small percentage actually get recycled. That's something I think for us to be looking at in terms of what we're able to do down the
So
road.
the planes can't even have plastic. Everybody.
Oh, at the airport,
That's what I mean.
yeah.
Plastic food packaging also, just, if you have the food for 10 minutes, do you really need it? If it's only in their shelf for a day. Steve?
At the Carbondale Mountain Fair, I think about 90 to 95% of the stuff that is there is compostable, because they require the vendors to have everything be compostable. If our whole country would do that, any packaging has to be compostable. Something that looks like plastic actually would have to be made from cornstarch or something, so it would be compostable. If you could divert 40% of the stuff coming into the landfill and compost it, would you be able to handle that much compost? It'd be a huge composting operation,
We'd have to
obviously.
expand. We could have to expand. We have
That'd
some
be a
room for
good
expansion.
expansion.
For an
yeah.
export market, yeah.
Totally, but yeah. So if we could get 40% into the more into the compost program,
And I'm thinking of the food waste. Well, that's where the 40%.
yeah. I mean,
That
food
was
waste
just
is the largest.
food waste was what I was thinking of from the compostable, but
Yeah,
you could have a huge amount of what's now being buried could actually go through the compost.
Yes, and we have tripled the amount of food waste we compost since 2015. So that program with our scratch program is growing consistently. So we're making some headway.
I think we're adding another big can at our recycling bins.
Makes such
For
a
compost.
huge difference when you do it.
They get full, and then people are like, oh, what do I do with this?
I'm sure we're tracking the amount of cardboard, the Amazon effect, and that everybody buys everything online now, it seems. Our recycle dumpster fills with cardboard faster than anything.
Right.
And everybody's, the Postal Service is running packages for Amazon, and FedEx is, they're all, fighting for the share of Amazon's
Not for
shipments.
long, Amazon's creating its own delivery
And
service.
you think they're dumping FedEx. But anyway, we're all getting a lot more cardboard, or at least my family is. Zappos shoes come every day, it seems.
Maybe
And then
that's
go
an
back.
issue with your children and
Yes,
their
it
family pairs
probably
of
is.
shoes.
Yeah, kids, But anyway, it seems that, is there a way that the cardboard could be handled more smartly, or is it easily enough separable from the single stream?
Well, cardboard
Goes in its own.
So Rio Grande is going with a cardboard-only dumpster. They're right now trying to work out where it's going.
They've got those 3 or those 5 or so, don't they, down at Rio Grande?
Yeah, and it'll still be, because those 6-yard bins now are going away on August 30th.
Oh.
I'm not involved in their planning. We are partnering with them on some certain things. So we are taking a larger gable top container down, what used to be down there before we switched to single stream. So the county, we are giving them the leftover ones we have, and they're going to collect cardboard separately. Right now, they're trying to figure out where it's going to go. Waste management, their transfer station in Willits. So when they tip on the floor there at that recycled transfer station, they pull out as much cardboard as they can get. It goes to Grand Junction, I believe, to a facility in Grand Junction, and they bulk it there and send it to commodity markets, clean cardboard. So we could potentially look at that, just getting kind of take certain items and because cardboard is the biggest part. If you look at the piles at the landfill, it's the biggest recyclable in there in the single stream. So we're going to continue to look at that if we can find if it's worthwhile to get it separated as much as we can along with glass.
We've done it ours too. Not that this is not a safety issue, but we have an X-Acto blade now on a string. Tell people, please cut down your cardboard.
Yeah, because
And I was really impressed that somebody thought to do that, because people are just, oh, I can't, I'll just toss it. I've pulled out more cardboard boxes from our trash dumpster, and I'm not very tall. I'm like hanging over the edge. Boom.
And if
It takes up so much
The
room.
fee for a load that's not done properly there's a $15 per ton additional surcharge? I'm just thinking
From the
about,
waste haulers?
or is it for
25.
is it 25 per ton additional surcharge for a load that has to be sorted? It's not, doesn't meet the
So
requirements?
151 is the max load, so depending on where you're at in the tier structure, if
Okay,
you've sorted,
alright.
it's 91.
That's on C and D,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah,
thinking
but I don't know what
domestic.
our waste hauler charges when people just are messy.
We don't, there is a fine structure, so if a trash truck, and it rarely ever occurs, and it's usually a very honest mistake, so if we do have a fine structure in our waste and recycling diversion ordinance, that if they bring us a total load of recycling, like single stream, and the guy accidentally went to the trash and not the single stream pile, we have a fine structure, and it's like 125.
To
I can't recall
disincentive,
offhand.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
It's
so
like
they'll
think
get
before you
hit.
drop.
It has not happened. They're usually very good. So
So I will say this next part of the presentation is where we're trying to throw a dart at a board, and we want to make sure we're getting close for the board before we get into the 2020 budget process.
So recycling budget impacts. So we're looking at a big increase. So single stream to transfer out of the solid waste center, we transfer out directly to Denver processing market, is going up 113% next year.
This is cost to the county.
Yes.
Sounds like health insurance.
We're not charging our citizens, we're being charged this.
What we
Thank
will
you.
absorb as a contract cost. If you've seen what Rio Grande, the driver for Rio Grande to go to this more specified diversion, it was going to be $700,000 with contamination charges. They were looking at close to $1 million to run the Rio Grande. We were paying $224,000. Next year it was going up to $700,000 to $1 million, just depending. There were so many unknowns written into those contracts.
How often do you have a tractor trailer go to Denver?
Right now, we are at 3 times a week. Right now, we're doing it pretty much daily, 5 days, because the price is going up in September is actually when our contract switches over, so we're trying to get as much out. But we've been averaging during the busy season 3 times a week.
Well, it's like a bus service. We could do ride share.
Yeah, so hop on the semi guy, and they're usually pretty pleasant.
Something, rather than the bus now, we're gonna have to come up with a different name.
So the cost to transfer right now, it costs Picken County $77 a ton to get recycling out to Denver. With this 113% price increase, it'll be $190 a ton.
Wow.
And we expected that. Maybe not that high, but we expected a pretty good increase. So we're looking at a 2020 estimated increased cost of $302,000 from what we're paying now. So pretty big. So, we've been doing the CPI, Consumer Price Index increase for recycling these past few years, 2.5%. We're maybe recommending a 20% increase for budgeting reasons. So right now it's $29 a ton to tip, maybe upping that to $34.50 a ton. It won't certainly cover that $480,000 cost to transfer out, but it'll lessen the impact a bit. To give you some perspective, to dump trash tipping fee is $60 a ton. It'll be in 2020 based on the CPI increase. So we still want to encourage it. We don't want to make it more expensive than trash. So again, we'll be back in November with the budget discussion if we can discuss further.
So just to clarify, our increased cost in 2020 is going to be around $300,000. Our additional revenue is around $12,500 with the increase. So in other words, that's nothing compared to the cost.
Correct.
Okay, so that's food for thought, folks.
It's been consistently, it's always been a heavily subsidized commodity recycling, so it will continue unless we want to raise it to $190 a ton, which I don't, then nobody would do it.
Right.
Okay.
There's a little bit on the history, just watching historically what it's cost us, how much have we been subsidizing it so far? I don't know if that was in there, I didn't. I'm just trying to think, so people understand it has always been subsidized. The subsidies we're gonna have to do more, but we've already been doing it.
Right, so it's about $140,000 right now, today, to get recycling, the contracted cost to get recycling to Denver. So that's about our estimated revenues this year for tipping is about $60,000. So we're subsidizing about $60,000, $70,000 to get recycling to Denver, which trash covers. So we build that into the trash tipping fee to cover sort of these things that don't support themselves fully.
So while this decision stands alone, and we don't need the decision today, we're just checking in with you for the 2020 budget process, it does lead to the C&D discussion next, because our proposed program for construction and demolition debris has revenue attached to it that we will benefit from. So if we could go to that.
So, so with our new tiered pricing structure proposed with the C&D proposed diversion ordinance, we're going to be working on through the fall. We're looking at increasing revenues for construction demo tipping fees by 55%, which we estimate for construction demo revenue only tipping, this not include the MSW regular household trash, we're estimating $4,288,000 just in construction demo debris. It's significant. That's an increase over this year of $1.5 million just with this new ordinance. And how our thought process on that, and with conversations with ComDev, we only think about 20% of new construction jobs are really going to make the effort and sort. We're thinking 80% aren't going to they're not going to bother with it. So if you don't want to bother with it, we're going to increase our revenues because we have things we have to cover. So this C&D diversion program is pretty significant. What we're looking at, it's going to require some pretty hefty management. So that $1.5 million in additional revenue can support an FTE, full-time equivalent, just to manage the C&D diversion program. It'll allow us to add equipment and programs to increase C&D diversion. We're looking at a wood grinder next year for our brush. If we can get untreated lumber out, we could grind that, make a mulch product. We can get that to maybe gypsum's biomass facility if it's clean enough to find reuse for that, and we can add that to our C&D diversion list, what you're required to do. And that, again, if you go back to that pie graph, dimensional lumber is our biggest disposal. And then add education and outreach programs. Also, I didn't add this bullet point, but we got some expansions we're looking at. We got 2 we're looking at. One is in the process with the state, so cover those costs.
Just out of interest, how long is that process? We've got 4 to 5 years left, do you think, in the space and landfill?
We're about 18 months. I would think maybe with about a year from now, we will be able to go forward with it. With one, the north expansion. We haven't really gotten into the southern, the larger expansion yet. But I think in about a year, we could have the go-ahead to start constructing it. We will put in the budget for 2020 construction of that north expansion.
That buys us 7 years.
Correct.
Around that, yeah.
Right. Okay.
I have a question. What is, back to the single stream one, so that's what you're charging the haulers to bring to you. So what is the expectation about them passing on that cost if we're increasing it by 20%?
They'll pass it on. I would like to get kind of a feel from you all now if that's reasonable, because they're starting to do their budgeting too, and they up contracts throughout the course of a year. As a contract expires, they'll up that price. So they'll probably pass it on. Our new diversion ordinance allows them to show on the bill what their recycling costs were. So they're they want to get that out as it's not free. So
Well, maybe that's an incentive point, though, if the person who's paying the end bill says, wow, and the contractor was to say, well, if you wanted us to do the right thing, their cost would be X, but it would cost you a little more in the construction, the labor's time, but you'd save this and just giving it to the county. So maybe that's a good way. I'd rather see, it's like court, we'd rather see people do the right thing than charge them to continue to do the wrong thing.
right.
So the next time you'll see these numbers is in 2020 budget process more comprehensively with the rest of the landfill budget. But again, we're just making sure we're kind of on target here and you feel comfortable with these increases.
Compared to other communities, how are we doing with this? Is this unique enough, or can you look at Boulder and the other places we compare ourselves to, Denver? How are they handling that? They must be having the same problem with the cost of recycling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, everybody's got this problem.
And
This
the
isn't-
country has
We're not unique in that regard.
Some of the more forward-thinking communities like us, Summit County, Boulder County, they're absorbing the cost, working it into the trash costs, having trash subsidized. Some of these more rural communities that don't have, they're limited on resources, or tipping fees are really low, they just can't do it. So there are some front range, really small landfill communities, they're just not going to do it anymore, if they even started it to begin with, recycling. So I feel confident, and the markets feel confident, if we just ride this out a couple of years, we can, some domestic markets.
Well, and if and when that does happen, will we revisit this and bring the prices back down so we're not just saying, oh,
Absolutely.
we're keeping it? I think that it's important for the public to know that.
This is a one-year decision, Patty.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Thanks.
And if we
Thank
can
you.
work on incentivizing people to do the right thing with it at the outset,
Yes.
whatever it takes. I don't know. I'm sure you've thought about it.
In our education programs, where recycle right, we did magnets, they're evolving more towards the reduce, reuse, refuse, and then recycle. We're really trying to get that message out. Just think about your consumer habits on what you're buying and the recyclability of it. So hopefully this minimalism movie
the
screening.
little 3 words are becoming like, pretty soon you can have
Recycle
rethink,
and then refuse.
redesign.
Well, and a bigger scale picture, I mean, Kathy and I touched base a little bit. There is a zero waste interim committee that is discussing potential statewide legislation to address some of these topics, I think, that, we'll be
It's
active
going to
on
bring
in the
back the
coming
styrofoam
session.
issue again, because that one to me is just
That's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
If we can make recommendations on packaging, you know, as if we go, like, you go to DIA, I haven't checked in our airport for packaging, but in DIA, you everything's wrapped or encased in plastic, which you discard before, you know, it's crazy how much stuff is unnecessarily. So maybe there's a way we can start promoting, you know, wax paper or waxed cardboard or, you know, containers. Maybe people just haven't done the homework to get the right containers for the foods, and we can try to introduce those into the
Bring your
stores.
sandwich in a Tupperware and reuse it when you get
Right,
home.
or a cardboard box, you know.
Right, and you know, we have a wonderful compost program just up the road from the airport. You know, it's vendors and all that that's tricky. Convenience, and they're making money and they need to be
Well,
quick.
I'd love to see recommendations from you all, on, you know, maybe there are just ways we can do something effective that hasn't occurred to us.
So I have a question, kind of off this, but you're here, and because it's becoming that time of year again, people are starting to think about putting their yards and gardens to bed. I mean, it's a little early, but so what is your availability of product at the landfill?
We have a lot right now, so we've got a lot of topsoil, potting soil on the ground, and pretty good amount of compost. We also have a lot of rock and aggregate product back in stock, so we've got everything you could want.
Possibly need. And it's a great opportunity for people to go visit the landfill
Yeah,
and help support it.
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming in.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see this train wreck, train coming, not a train wreck. It's not a train wreck because you're doing such a good job
Yes, we understand.
alerting us about the train coming.
Responding to a problem. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I'm gonna run these numbers by my neighbor too and see what he's seeing. He's been involved with the county process on the whole new county land use code issues too, so Sam's a great guy to run this by.
Sam is very
Sam is
involved.
great. That's why I got my new red door and my
He
new porch.
emails me a lot about things, so Sam is on it.
I will run it by Sam.
All right,
Thank
thanks a
you.
lot. Okay, we're queued up for future agenda calendar review.
All right, just a couple of items for you. First, the Healthy Rivers and Streams meeting, which I cannot remember when we had that scheduled, but we are rescheduling it probably in October. They I think, had some scheduling conflicts and needed some more time, so we'll be finding an agenda in October for that. And then I just note, and you probably saw this on the agenda for today, that our applicant for the Board of Health could only be here at 4:45. Any additional time we have after the Phillips presentation, I think we had some ongoing executive items that will go upstairs and continue.
Right.
And I know it's been an issue with us getting out of here when we have P and Z coming in, because they have a setup time, it just delays their meeting. So in the future, maybe we can look at those days and give ourselves a little break so we can get out and they can get in. I think it's helpful for their schedule.
And they're meeting today at 5. That's really all I've got for you on future agendas.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just actually just saw this, so I haven't, believe it or not, the only one comment I have, and it'd be part of our board discussions on committees, is please don't forget about the Aqua Blend on the, what date was that? On the 4th. It's a great event, and we need to get tickets. So Charlotte is handling that for us. It's from 2:30 to 5 on Aspen Mountain at the Sun Deck. It's a great event. And George is gone for a bazillion years, so we're covering for him this year.
God, I think I'm signed up for it.
There's the event on Tuesday morning, September 24th, that I think we were going to talk about at open discussion, but looking on September 24th, we don't have anything in the morning then,
Right.
which is when that meeting was to be held.
Right, this was this was with the Rocky Mountain Health Plan people, Rocky Mountain. sorry,
Fund, Pick and Fund or something?
I'll get to it.
Rocky Mountain Health Foundation listening session.
I received an invitation to that, for that morning, and it's 10:30 to 11:30 or something like that, so it's possible we could all, one or all of us could go to that, whoever's interested.
I have a ACRA meeting that morning, that's why we're starting late.
So I think we should go ahead and add that to the agenda. I would plan on being there.
I only wanted to
Yeah,
make
so
sure.
Just for
got it.
public,
Yeah.
maybe not on the agenda for our agenda, but on our public noticing on the extra events.
So for the board, it's Tuesday, September 24th, 10:30 to 12. It's going to be in this building in the Roaring Fork Room. And it looks like this is more of a listening session.
That's, I
For
think
the-
they called it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a foundation that was created when Rocky Mountain Health Plans was acquired by United Health, I believe to fulfill the nonprofit mission that Rocky Mountain Health Plans had prior to being acquired.
That's
They
at
have
10:30 a.m.
$38 million in their, it looks like an endowment that they're looking at how to spread across 22 western Colorado counties.
Right. So we can, whoever wants to go to that, if more than 3 go, or more than 2 go, then we just need to notice it, right? I'm not certain I guess it must be public.
Well, if there's 3 of you going, then we have to,
Yeah, just,
I'll be at
that's why I
Accra.
sent it to Charlotte, so you won't be here. I
Well,
was
why
gonna plan on
don't
going.
we can go ahead and put it on if there's interest.
Sure. Just thinking that the
Sounds like
agenda,
2
we're
of
pretty
you
far
for
out there.
sure.
If the
Yeah.
agenda
Okay.
changes, I don't want to, if our agenda changes and we have to move our agenda up for something, then I guess
Well, they won't
Patty's
because
not here. Okay, got it. All
if
right.
anything, we move it to 11 on Tuesdays when I have Accra,
Hmm.
because Accra's in the morning, so.
I also
Okay.
just want to note that on the 25th, I was planning on being at the, it's all the interbasin roundtables are meeting in Winter Park for the whole state. And so I was planning on being at that meeting.
September 25th.
Yeah.
I think that would be valuable to have you be able to attend that.
So you won't be at the regular meeting then?
Right.
So do I get him that day then?
Sure.
I think I'll be here. Well,
I have a daycare
That's
for
it.
him.
Nothing else for me.
starting next
Anybody
week.
else?
No?
All right, moving right along. We can go into board open discussion.
So the first time, and Steve, I think you may have brought this up last time, the CCI legislative committee appointment is due by October 11th, and I'm trying to remember, I think.
Well, I think we
Oh,
picked, one of us is picked. I just,
yeah, and
we need
we
to
weren't
get
sure
out our
either.
thing, the appointment, the sheet in January when we do the appointments, would
Right.
have it on there, which one of us was put down for that. I'm sure we already decided,
I don't recall.
just arbitrarily, and we can't remember.
well, who's doing
I
what
thought
committee?
s-
Well,
Yeah,
I
with
thought,
committee or
I know
point
both
person?
of you are when we did the resolution appointing, I'm not sure we went down to that level of detail. We'll go and
Well, I
look.
think we did.
We
Yeah, you
did,
did it,
on the
Brooke.
CCI legislative committee.
Yeah.
Look it
Okay,
out by committee.
we'll fill that out then. We'll go back and look at that. Only other item that I had was a correction. During last open discussion, George, you had asked about the permitting process for the gas station in front of Aspen Village. And I had misspoke at that time.
They did have to have a
There were earth moving permits that were
Right.
issued. It was exempted from land use, and so that was the exemption.
It was exempted from land use because we had no authority over it because the state does that.
The state does the permitting, and it was already anticipated within the zoning that was approved. It is a temporary surface disruption, which exempts it from the land use.
So would a earth moving permit normally come before us or come before a special review, or it's administrative?
Correct.
And no public.
And it was issued per our code.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
And there will be another one issued when the old tanks are dug up.
Can Ben, you're following up on the use of, any expansion of use or the shed that's there and the expansion of use at the retail nursery, wholesale nursery.
Yeah, so I've got those questions.
They're
and
still in
have
works?
those
Okay.
answers for you. Yeah,
Got it.
that's it.
Okay. That's it.
That's all I have for open discussion.
Anyone else? Guess not. All right, we're gonna move on. Boy, now see, we're ahead of the game.
I know, I'm just gonna see if I can get hold of.
You can do committees.
Membership reports.
Membership reports would be good.
Okay,
Northwest Cog?
go ahead.
Meetings
Person
this Thursday. We're moving forward. There is a draft policy letter. I just got it. I haven't had a chance to review it. On when we can issue letters in support of or not in support of, how we're gonna handle it through the process of the Northwest Cog membership. We don't really have a standing policy, so that's in the work. If I have any questions about, I'll run it by John to see if that's okay with the board. Like I said, John Stabney just sent it to me. I have not had a chance to review it. Our meeting is over in Frisco, and I will be chairing because Karn is at a watershed meeting or some water meeting over in Steamboat Springs, I think, this week. She's doing something over there. I don't know if it's been one of their water issues or something. So I won't be there. The next one is the workforce. We're still trying to vet out what workforce is doing here in the Valley. Nan Sundin has been great contact person for that. State changed the law on what the attendance is and how the meetings are held. So Nan and I are still trying to figure out what the heck they're doing in the Roaring Fork Valley. And the other one is, of course, I just already mentioned with ACRA, is the blend meeting. And other than that, ACRA is still following our energy code issues. They've taken that up as one of their policy committee causes, which is great. And Sam, who sits on the new ACRA board representing the construction industry, is really good about bringing us forward statistics on permits being issued, percentages that they've increased or decreased between City of Aspen, Snowmass, and Pickens County. It's really interesting information. And I'll try and get him to print me those out next time, and I'll bring them forward to you guys so you can see the numbers. Other than that, that's it. And John, thank you for taking the healthy forest thing off of this list.
I have to give Sean a
Yay!
Is the Northwest Cog discussion related to the core letter issue?
No, that's Club 20.
Okay, got it.
No, this one is just an overall general policy.
Okay, thank you.
Good question, though.
Okay, who's next? George, do you want to do core?
Let's see, core is, we've approved our rent budget for the year, and that will be coming before City Council and us probably in September or October. And we are in the midst of finishing up our draft of our new strategic plan with a new mission and vision statement.
Great. That come out of your retreat?
It did, yes, and some follow-ups.
Okay, let's see, do you have Raft on here?
Rafta, let's see, Rafta as well, from the retreat this past August or July, presented our draft strategic plan for Rafta. And we also are looking at our fare policy for our buses. So we've got a consultant working on that. And we have, I believe, this week or next week at the latest, our delivery of our electric buses.
Right.
Wow.
That'll be
And
exciting.
they'll have to go through the next couple months, working with staff for training, for maintenance, looking at the facilities. So they'll be working on all that, and hopefully we should see them on the road by November.
Can I
I'm sure we'll have a ribbon cutting alongside with the City of Aspen sometime this fall.
Are the charging stations in at the bus barn here in town, or the one at the ABC?
I don't know that.
And another question about fares. Would you, if you didn't already, or if somebody didn't, bring in a consideration of fares for people with permanent disabilities, not people with just like a knee and, short term, because then everybody would be riding for free in this community, but people who are valid federally declared disabled persons to be able to ride for no charge. I think that would be very beneficial.
Okay, that's Rafta. Senior council, you want to shift to Steve?
Senior council will be meeting tomorrow while we are meeting here, so I will not be able to attend that. And I talked to Patty Kravitz about that, and she won't be attending either as staff person because she's at training, so I'm not sure what they have going on, except I think there will be a booth at the Aspen Farmers Market one of these weekends coming up.
Okay, great, good to know. Farmers market, Saturday market.
Yeah.
All right, what's next on here?
Well, we skipped CCI.
You can hit that if you want.
CCI, Kelly and I will be going to Fairplay on Thursday to attend the CCI Mountain District summer meeting, where they get representatives from, I think it's nine counties in the Central Mountains attend that meeting. And it's fun because it moves around to different locations every summer. So I've gotten to go to Cripple Creek, and now we'll get to go to the county building in Fairplay. And
Wow.
And I think that agenda involves discussing the legislative priorities for the coming year. We had a general steering committee call a few weeks ago where we had offered some things we wanted CCI to consider, and then they take that list of potential bills to the individual districts to kind of help further that conversation as to what CCI might support or request to be submitted in the coming legislative session.
Do some of those get transferred, those ideas, over to CCAT?
Some of them will. CCAT has a narrower policy agenda where there's kind of 4 buckets of things: housing, healthcare. I'm forgetting the other 2 at the moment.
transportation.
Yeah, transportation, and something else that's what they'll address. And then CCI has kind of a broader scope of things that affect counties. So as you guys may remember, we had asked for things like expanding business licensing opportunity, the RET, real estate transfer taxes, and so we'll continue to discuss those as well as others that other counties have proposed.
Okay, down the list, RWAPA, just looking at my recent correspondence, we had a RWAPA retreat earlier back in July. And since then, we had rain events that caused a lot of concern in the frying pan. And in order to flush mud and extra stuff out, I know Rudai released some, I'm trying to get to my email on it, released some additional flows, which was a regime they were going to keep going, but they didn't need to. So they did some additional releases in order to flush extra mud and sediment out, but it didn't seem to be as big a deal. It didn't come back around to us. Our aquatic nuisance species program this year has been incredibly successful. 10% of the aquatic nuisance species interdicted in the state, 6 cases out of 60 were at Rudai, I believe, this year. And that's it was surprising because it's been very few to actually get mussels. I think all of them were from Lake Powell. Our inspectors have been on the job almost sunrise to sunset, and even a little bit beyond sunset, so people can get off the water right at sunset or just after. That's going well. They're expanding their operation a little bit just to make it more comfortable and easier for people to get in and out, to move them more quickly and to be more secure. I guess April visited the Rudai ramp one day when there was a conflict between a boat owner who wanted to get on the water and the inspectors who wouldn't let him until he was inspected and cleaned. And she said they handled it very well, but it was just kind of great to see it in person, to actually see that this is something ongoing every day where, these guys have to stop everyone, inspect the boat, clean it if necessary, explain the whole thing. So we're trying to streamline that process. And we'll hear more. That was in July, was that last meeting. And what else do we have here? Anybody else want to? CC4CA? I don't know what our last report was on them.
So CC4CA, we supported the zero emission vehicle rules that that were being considered by the Air Quality Control Commission last week. That commission did adopt zero emission vehicle rules. They did not adopt the straight California standard. What they had done and what you might have seen in the news was that the governor's Clean Energy Office had negotiated with the automakers for a different approach to that, to achieving those goals of increasing the number of electric and zero emission vehicles that are offered statewide. So the commission, instead of adopting the California standard, adopted this negotiated approach, which what it does is the California standard would have required by 2023 that 5% of all vehicle sales in the state be a zero emission vehicle. And so therefore that quota requires them to put more on the market. What the negotiated approach achieves is allowing some credit for vehicles that are offered for sale before that timeline to go towards their percentages required. It's a little bit of a gamble as to whether we're going to get more in the end. The big incentive there is that it could get more on the market sooner, because the types of vehicles that are being offered that they would get credit for could come online for sale in Colorado before 2023. So, we'll stay tuned to see if we get more than we might have out of the California standard, but all in all, a good win. Hopefully we'll see, bigger markets here in Colorado too.
When we're joining 11 other states, 10 or 11 other states that are adopting this standard, so it should mean that electric vehicle choices will be greater here as well as in the other states, and hopefully ubiquitous everywhere. That's the idea. That every state will have a good selection of choices.
So that's happening. There's also rulemaking with regards to the oil and gas legislation that passed, and that rulemaking has sort of been carved up into different approaches. So it's kind of the first bite at the apple, and I don't know all the details with that right now. But that's CC4CA.
I did go to the Club 20 meeting that was held here in Snowmass Village earlier this summer, and they invited me to make an introduction. And my introduction generally was just on the importance of the outdoor economy, recreation and outdoor economy, clean air being super important, and that we were serious about climate change issues, and that we were hoping Club 20 would keep considering those in future. Going forward, because I know there's been some sentiment that they're not really paying attention to maybe the mountain towns regarding outdoor rec. It was an interesting meeting from what I saw of it. I know Rachel attended, and she may have more, but that was it.
Club 20 will be having the fall meeting in Grand Junction. September 20th will be the business part, and September 21st on Saturday will be more of the public speaker part. I know Scott Tipton is expected to be there. The 21st, I'm actually going to be up at Sky Mountain Park rolling up barbed wire somewhere, so I'll be able to go on the Friday, but not the Saturday. And CCAT will be holding its fall retreat on October 18th in Denver. And that will be, I think, pretty much gearing up for the legislative session.
Anything else on any of these? I see Compact for Colorado Communities. I don't know what they're doing.
I'll just touch base a little bit because I don't think I reported out at the about the last Colorado Basin Roundtable, Colorado River Basin Roundtable meeting, and there was a 4-basin roundtable meeting in Grand Junction that I went to about a week or 3 days before I had this guy. So in late June, and something that was really interesting about that was the presentation of this risk study that essentially was looking at if we were to hit a compact call, what the hydrology indicated for all the different basins' requirements to send water down to Lake Powell. And what I found really interesting about this study, it looked at the different basins and the percentages of water that, that are contributed to the water that we send down to Lake Powell now, and then also looked at the different percentages of the total. It then calculated based on different projections of how much water under a compact call we might need to send down and how that would get spread out among the basins, and then what year of call that would initiate. So it kind of drilled down into that real detailed level. What's really interesting about the Colorado River Basin is that we have so much pre-compact water rights in our basin area that, it was looking at like the late 60s or 70s for when those water rights would need to have been acquired to start sending water down, as opposed to the Trans Mountain Diversion water, which makes up the bulk of what we would be required to send down. So it creates an interesting policy conversation because, if you just looked at the numbers, the bulk of the water that we would send to Powell would come from Trans Mountain Diversions, which would obviously be very politically unpalatable to other parts of the state. So it tees up
But
a
it would be
pretty,
to our benefit.
yes.
Yes.
It would. It just
Would
tees
make
up a
everybody
very
happy.
interesting conversation about all this. And you may have seen in, I think, just yesterday's paper, there was an article talking about how the lower basin states are already starting their required mandatory cuts. The upper basin, which we're part of, did not take a mandatory cut approach. So we're in conversations about demand management and how we might have a voluntary compensated and temporary program should any call be necessary for us to meet. So that's what I expect the whole statewide basin roundtable conversation to sort of centralize around in the next month.
Okay. Are we through it? Is there anything else we would need to add
We
here?
need to, John, we need to add APSHA on the
Oh,
board reports
right.
now.
Absolute report. That's right.
Oh, what a,
You're right. Yeah, we will do that going forward.
We have an APSHA meeting tomorrow.
Okay.
can't wait to read about it in the paper the next day.
We'll read it.
Seems to be the hot topic.
I did notice a typo on here, John, it's for CCAT, it's commissioners, counties and commissioners acting together. So the word Colorado should read counties.
Oh, okay.
Right, because you can join that group as an individual commissioner.
All right. I would, if we're done with this, I would like to take a short break if we can.
What happened to you going back into exec? Are you guys planning at some point?
Yeah. We're gonna do that
After this community presentation?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I think that, well, we've got 25 minutes.
From 4:15 to 4:45. It's just not marked on.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just wasn't sure when.
4:15 is when we go in exec.
So you guys are gonna catch me up on everything you talked about for the first 12 hours of the day?
Okay, so
We
grassroots,
can.
we're gonna take a 10-minute break. Back at 2:46 or so, if not sooner.
Or so.
Only 4 hours time difference, but all of a sudden I started doing
Stay on a boat the whole time?
Yeah, that's it, an espresso again.
Thanks. Since I was last here. Yeah, 8 weeks today. How long? 8 weeks. That's wonderful. Yeah, he is. That's easy. I would never have known either of my kids would have made it through something like that. Oh, my first one wouldn't either. He's so mellow. That's great.
Yeah, I mean,
What's his name?
Lisa, I'm gonna download mine and then we can just.
I'd have to walk. I was parked up at the top of Aspen Mountain, and my heart just wasn't into. It was already a struggle just walking up from where I did walk up. Yeah, I did. Yeah, then I was like, I mean, if I had.
She's here. Now we're all chewing. Okay, we're back. It is Tuesday, August 20th, and we're final, I listed the 3:15 agenda. We're a little early. Is health impact assessment at Phillips Mobile Home Park. Karen and guests.
Sure. So Karen Hedman, King County Public Health Director, and I'm here with Lisa Headington, who's been working with DHM Design Consulting around the Phillips Mobile Home Park. As you have met Lisa before, but I'm going to have her introduce herself a little bit more in context of pulling out the health impact assessment and really focusing in on that today. I'll start out the presentation with just a brief overview, really for the audience to put this in context to some of the other things we've been talking about, and then have Lisa dive into her presentation.
Good afternoon. So,
Welcome.
yes, I'm Lisa Headington, and I've been the health impact specialist for the Phillips project, and working very closely with Laura and Bob and the engineers as well at times. And I have worked mostly on health impact assessment in Denver, and have really appreciated this opportunity to expand my experience to a more rural context, which has been pretty fascinating, and to focus on housing instability. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions too.
Okay.
Okay.
Presentation or questions? Are we going right?
Your choice.
Presentation.
Okay, great. So just again, a reminder of context. So thinking about health in all sectors approach. So thinking about how do we include a health lens in other sectors in our world, or in our communities. So other sectors could include transportation, housing, other healthy food access. And so how do we think about health in relation to sectors that might not always have a health lens, and just shining a spotlight on health in relation to those sectors? So an HIA is a tool to do this kind of work. It allows you to think about health in relation to community development and master planning and site planning. So it's a way to use a health lens in relation to community development work. And we've reflected on these before, but this is just a reminder because Lisa will be talking about these in her presentation as well. So we really have different determinants that go into our health outcomes, and health outcomes are our length of life and our quality of life. And so when we think about all the different determinants of health, which include things like health behaviors, the choices we make, clinical care, which is access to dental, physical, mental health care. When we look at the very bottom of this chart, you can see that the social and economic and physical environment, the conditions in which we live, actually make up 50% of our health outcomes. So when we think about things like health in all sectors or health in all policies potentially, we're really thinking about how we influence these other sectors to think about health because they actually have some of the biggest impact on our health outcomes. And we know that stress really equals a poorer quality of life. And so when we think about how does something like housing or transportation actually impact health, it really does reflect on stress and chronic stress in the body and how that influences the body. So it increases our cortisol levels, that it actually triggers things like chronic disease and chronic mental health conditions. And so all of these different determinants of health can really play a role in creating elevated stress levels, which actually impact health in the long run. So we've talked a lot in board meetings about equality, and I just wanted to elevate this out again because Lisa will be talking about this in relation to a health impact assessment, which is a tool that actually focuses on equality. Some of the metrics and the ways of looking at health impact assessments allow us to think about equality in a different way when we're looking at a multi-sectoral approach. And so this is just a basic definition looking at equality versus equity. And so when we think about equality, we think about sameness. And so we think about everybody, it's the bottom picture, the top picture, everybody has the same bike, but it doesn't fit for everybody's needs. And so we're really looking at the sameness, but then we can see that it doesn't fit for each individual person. When we think about equity, we're really thinking about fairness. So how do we have a bike that really fits the person and allows them to be able to participate in that activity? So again, looking at equality versus equity and thinking about health equity as a component of a health impact assessment. And then what is health equity? So we've looked at equity as a basic principle, but health equity really takes that one step further and thinks about giving everyone the same opportunity to attain their highest level of health. So again, it's thinking about the bike scenario or the bike analogy that we're looking at creating a sense of fairness so that everybody has the bike that they need to be able to be healthy. And inequities are created when there's barriers and conditions in which we live. So when we have barriers that then produce inequities, people aren't able to reach their highest level of health, and they're really not achieving their highest level of health outcomes.
Can I just,
Yeah.
You said everyone has the same opportunity, but it's not written on there that way. I think that's a key word.
Okay. Yeah.
Because when we're talking equity, everyone has the opportunity, but everyone has the same opportunity. How
Sure.
they utilize that is different, but.
And I think that when we think about opportunities, the choices we make are limited by the choices that we have. And so we know that everybody has choice in their life and we all have the opportunities to make choices, but some people have more choices than others. And so just to frame that up a little bit. And this is, again, just kind of why is health equity important? So looking at all of those different determinants, which are the roots of the tree, and then how they play a role in really creating a thriving trunk, I would say. And then how does that reflect out into different conditions or health outcomes at the very top? So we, again, know that social determinants really play a role in some positive community assets that then play a role in our health outcomes. So we want to really morph toward the asset-based approach and looking at all these different conditions, how they create a stronger community for all of us to thrive in. And so I want to just take a moment and commend the county for looking at Phillips as an opportunity to actually increase health equity in this community. By sheerly preserving affordable housing in this community, that is a gigantic step in looking toward health equity. And I know that it's, with all of the pieces that we've been learning about Phillips, there will be a lot of challenges and barriers, but I think just taking a step back and acknowledging what the Board of County Commissioners did when they chose to preserve this affordable housing was pretty instrumental in improving health equity in this community. And I would just want to acknowledge that and say, as we move forward through the health equity, or the health impact assessment, this health equity component is really significant. And we have seen many, many mobile home parks in the state of Colorado being bought out. And as we know, people have been forced, in essence, to move from those communities. And the impact to the people of that community is pretty severe. And when we think about the chronic stress and the housing instability that they've felt as they've had to move out of those mobile home parks. So I just want to say thank you for thinking about this in the ways that you have, and allowing this to be a potential for growth, and as far as preserving affordable housing and continuing to maybe even look at other kinds of housing on this property.
If I could, on that slide, you just have preserving affordable housing equals health equity. I'm being, with the math background, you tend to, so really it's contributing to, but it's, just want to clarify that in case somebody sees that. And it's done. We got it. We're done.
We got it. We're done.
Yes, I can have an arrow and
maybe an arrow.
Yeah, and that was me trying to abbreviate, so I will take that
It's a
totally
headline
into
abbreviation.
consideration. Yes. Great. So I'm going to
Do
pull
you
up
want to advance
Lisa's.
those slides for me?
Yes, I
Okay.
will.
So my goal today then is to talk about HIA a little bit more, just sort of generally how it came about, and then a reminder of how we used it at Phillips, what we learned, and then how you might use that information going forward.
Give me 1 second.
All right, it's trying to load it. There it is.
Yeah, there we go. So you
Okay.
go on to the next one. Is it not going forward?
All right. I'm telling it to move, but
Maybe-
it's not wanting to.
We're all
Yeah.
technologically challenged as we grow older.
Thank you, Steve.
And there's no equity in that, Steve, at all. So,
It's just not advancing for some reason. Try. Oh. No, that's all you got. Let me just try this one more time.
Did you get to the first slide?
I did.
Click on the slides, if that.
I'm saying
maybe
Zoom,
just,
but it's not.
And then did you
Oh.
do that?
I did, but
You did it slideshow and slideshow.
It seems like this is not cooperating with us.
It's funny that it would show it here, but not respond to those
Oh, there it
commands.
goes.
There it
Thank
goes.
you.
It's just one of those things where you always have to rehearse it.
that's great. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so
Sorry,
you go
Lisa.
to the next one. Yeah.
Okay, here we are.
So, as Karen has spoken to you about, there are many land use and transportation decisions that affect health, even those that maybe don't seem to on the surface. So, for example, when a road is widened, it can change noise levels, air quality, safety of pedestrians and bicycles, and the like. And then those effects may, and then in turn, change the levels of health factors such as asthma, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, injury, or mortality. And as planners, we usually go from A to B. We talk about how widened roads or more highways may change noise levels, but rarely have we historically taken that third step and included then the health implications at the end of those arrows. So HIA has been a way of systematically including that information, making that information available to decision makers. The first HIA in this country was done in 2001 in San Francisco on the health benefits of a living wage ordinance. And by 2017, there are over 500 HIAs either done or in the works. So HIA emerged from several kinds of streams of information. One is the growing recognition of the social environmental determinants of health, the kinds of things Karen's been talking to you about. In addition, HIA was practiced in other parts of the world. In Europe, fairly frequently, in Australia, and in Thailand, it's actually a legal requirement for certain kinds of projects. So the WHO, the World Health Organization, started to put out calls for more HIA and for equity-focused health assessment of projects and developments, particularly in the developing world. In the U.S., another stream that contributed to the expansion of HIA here was dissatisfaction with the EIS and the national, required by the National Environmental Policy Act. So while there are over 500 EISs and EIAs done in this country every year, they tend to ignore human health impacts. So again, they may focus on toxics and on things like changes in air pollution, but then not take that next step and talk about the asthma rates that may change as a result, or even something like how a highway slicing through a neighborhood can sever critical community connections and social networks and the impacts on health that those kinds of things might have. So more recently, Health in All Policies has emerged as kind of an umbrella that incorporates HIA as one tool among many, and as a way of understanding and promoting health and health equity. And I would say that it's important to recognize that HIAP, Health in All Policies, doesn't necessarily mean you have to adopt a whole new layer of policies on top of what you've already got. It can mean that, but it can also mean things like data sharing across agencies or training staff widely in the health determinants. It could mean using metrics, such as measures of health and equity status, or health indicator checklists, such as healthy development checklist tools. Or it could be reviewing policy and legislation with a health lens, so looking to strengthen wording that is already mindful of health equity, or removing contradictions or wording that might not be supportive of health. In Pitkin County, where you already have so much in place, it could mean looking at the intersections of the kind of policies you already have. So, for example, if you look at the intersection of, say, housing policy and your climate action plan, what are the opportunities there? There may be opportunities to support health, particularly for vulnerable populations, and that's just one example. So this is, turning to Phillips, this is the graphic that, along with other information, was posted on the Phillips website to help inform residents about the process, what was being done, what they might expect, et cetera. Because HIA is not as EIS is, it's not a regulatory process, it's more flexible, and there's various types of HIA possible. So desktop, rapid HIAs, or full HIAs. But in each type, a central goal is to identify potential harms and potential benefits to health of a project or policy that's being proposed, and to recommend ways to maximize benefits and minimize harm. Inevitably, in all projects, there are pluses and minuses, and you see these in Phillips. So HIA tries to ensure that health and quality of life impacts are included in that balancing act. And it also focuses on transparency in the planning process and public processes, and inclusiveness and community engagement. So this is just sort of reiterates what Karen was just talking about. The World Health Organization has identified health equity as a human right, and this is a statement from some of their materials. So this is a quick reminder of how we did start to proceed on the HIA at Phillips. On the left side, you see some of the traditional steps in health impact assessment, the screening, scoping, assessment, and recommendations, and how we worked pretty hard to dovetail those steps with site planning and community engagement steps. Doing the HIA concurrent with the site planning process is somewhat unusual, but I think a pretty beneficial process. And I think more communities wish that they could do them in a concurrent fashion. So I commend you also for doing it this way. I wanted to also focus a little bit more on what went into the assessment, which is really the kind of meat of the project. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what was considered. I worked with Bob and Laura as the project started before the first meeting we had with residents to design an exercise that we did at the open house to gather initial information. Then we used some of that information to design the questionnaire. So Bob and I worked together on the questionnaire that was given to residents to ensure that some of the kinds of information that I would want for the health impact assessment would be incorporated into that. So we included this interview information and other community engagement data that Bob collected later through email questionnaires as well, open houses, the small group meetings that he did, and other email and phone conversations he had with folks, with residents there. I incorporated the findings from the site planning and engineering processes, your county and census tract level health data, and public health priorities from your new public health plan. Interviews from experts and key informants, literature reviews related particularly to the key health determinants that we decided on. And then the other tools that we used along the way in a pretty iterative fashion, so you kind of keep going back and forth in this project and this process, and as you learn more and kind of redoing some of these things. So constructing those pathway diagrams that illustrate the relationship between the determinants of health to health outcomes, and the prediction tables that you saw when you were looking at the alternative site plans. So some of those kinds of things were all included in assessment. And you'll recognize again here the three key health determinants, sort of groups of health determinants that we decided were the most relevant at Phillips. So housing stability and the categories underneath that, community qualities, and then the safety of housing, site, and infrastructure. What I really want to focus on today, though, is the information that came from the community itself and the recommendations that the HIA makes. So I'm going to jump into the questionnaire results. So early in assessment, scoping and assessment, 13 people sat down with Bob for extended interviews, and 3 more, and filled out a questionnaire at that time, and 3 more returned the questionnaire by email. So as you know, Bob continued to have many other small group meetings and one-on-one conversations, but the data I'm going to show you here really comes from those questionnaires. It's a small number of people, and it's important to say that it's not completely clear how representative these findings are of the community overall. And that was a problem we anticipated from the start of this project, that with a community this small, finding data that is relevant was predicted to kind of be one of the biggest challenges of the project, and that did kind of prove to be the case. But we worked hard to extrapolate, to bridge gaps by extrapolating from county level health data and trying to gather some qualitative data. And in addition, the HIA includes some recommendations for other kinds of data you might want to go after that could, I think, be helpful. So one thing I would say about this, if you look at the number of residents here over age 60, this could very well represent a sampling bias. It's possible that people, that would represent a number of retired folks who probably just have more time to sit and, go through a fairly long questionnaire with Bob. So for folks working 3 jobs to make ends meet and who have kids, they probably didn't have time to sit down with Bob. So it's uncertain whether the age composition of Phillips really, whether this is representative of overall of the age composition, but I did, to sort of try to check on this, have a conversation with Chad Federitz at your senior services, and who's very helpful and did confirm that Phillips is on their radar, that they've worked with folks there and used to have the van, senior van servicing the neighborhood. Again, we don't know for certain what the age range is of folks out there, or what it will be, depending on how the community may change, depending on the kinds of decisions you make.
What about English,
Go ahead.
English speaking? Do we have any idea what the percentage of non-English speaking is?
I don't think Bob has run across anybody who's non-English speaking.
Okay.
Yeah, unless that's happened since I
No,
last
that's good
connected
to know.
with him.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's just interesting.
Yeah. And I think these results, if you're on to the next one, yeah. These are pretty familiar to you. The residents are, as you know, most concerned about being forced out by increasing costs. Many have told Bob that they want to buy a lot if they can afford it. And they've talked a lot about why the Phillips location is so valuable to them. They've talked about it being a sort of mid-valley oasis, convenient to both Aswan and Basalt, but more peaceful. They talk about good neighbors, privacy, living close to the river, the beauty of nature and wildlife, access to open space and trails, and pets being allowed. Although, of course, there are some other people who have some issues with pets.
And that happens in any neighborhood.
Right. Okay, so we asked them all as well what feels healthy about living at Phillips, and we heard answers like these: the natural beauty of the site, immediate access to recreational opportunities, intimate size of the neighborhood, feeling safe from crime, access to trails, open space, and the river for both active and passive recreation were the most frequent kinds of responses. And when asked what feels unhealthful or stressful about living at Phillips, the most frequent responses you would expect is the uncertain future, despite what you've already done to try to reduce that uncertainty. What could make Phillips feel healthier? Most wanted safety, more safety from fire, improved safety, improved infrastructure, and the power lines buried. Some people mentioned better bus service, trash handling, and more space, more privacy between units. A couple people mentioned highway noise, but this seemed to be less concerning to people. Okay, so amenities. The responses indicated that residents were not overwhelmingly in favor of any one amenity or improvement. All these things were rated about equally. But an important caveat here is that when people aren't certain whether they're going to have a roof over their heads, whether they can continue to live at Phillips or not, amenities are probably not the first thing they're going to be thinking about. So I don't know that this information is, sort of the final say on amenities. I think that it was probably something you want to keep asking residents about, particularly because it's not clear who will be living there long term or how the composition of the community might change. And a little more on that later. Okay, so to jump into recommendations now. The first recommendation here on affordability, I think it probably goes without saying that you're going to continue to assess the cost to residents. I know that one of the recommendations from the housing instability study that Karen talked to you about was that recently was that you do a targeted study focused on vulnerable populations. What I'm suggesting here is a little bit different, but perhaps could dovetail with that. And that is, I would recommend a survey of residents of all your mobile home parks to learn about, for example, demographics, health status, needs of families and retirees, preferences for housing and community type, location, amenities, that sort of thing. Why do people choose to live in mobile home parks? What attracts them? What are the good and the bad, and how can you learn from that in shaping Phillips? I understand you have other county priorities, but this seems like it would be useful if it's something you're able to do. And then again, if Phillips is an affordable housing location, should it primarily target a segment of the population, for example, retirees or families, or should it continue to serve whomever wants to live there, so a broader demographic? Is that a question you want to tackle? Is it something you want to think about in the design of the neighborhood, of the community, and how the community might reflect this? So kind of throwing that out as a question. In Curry County, Oregon, where an HIA was done recently on a mobile home housing upgrade initiative, they found that in that community, mobile home parks were stigmatized. And the people living in them who were younger, young families, and young adults felt somewhat isolated because of the parks tend to be both visually and physically separated from other communities. My thesis, and I have no data to support this, is that you don't have that kind of stigma here. I think that's really interesting. It might be something to learn more about. What they did find in Curry County that I think is particularly interesting in relationship to Phillips is that despite the stigma for younger people, for older people, in contrast, the evidence, and I'm just going to read a quote from their study, the evidence does show that mobile home parks have the unique quality of providing a benefit to older adults and retirees through the facilitation of aging in place. Research indicates that the elderly and individuals of retirement age favored manufactured housing because it's inexpensive, provides a sense of security through close neighbors, and still offers independence. So I think that's pretty interesting, and I think it might apply to Phillips. There is not a lot of research on this. So.
Okay. I'm going to just add to that. From raising my children at Smuggler Trailer Court, it's and in watching the new next generation of younger children growing up, it's become a great place for kids to come, kids who live on Red Mountain, kids who live in the West End, kids who live Five Trees, come to our neighborhood to play because our streets are safe, and they can ride their bikes around the block, around the block, around the block. And it's a different, it's like living in a park, not necessarily a trailer park. And I think that's what people are finding, and probably why I've never felt stigmatized, and my children have never. And I don't think any of my neighbors do, who live there and have lived there for a while. And the new people who are moving in don't say, "Oh, I can't buy there. It's a trailer park." It's a great neighborhood, and I think it's because it offers those things. As does Aspen Village, as does Woody Creek, as does Lazy Glen, and as will Phillips. So I think if anything, the stigma is what a great place.
I've driven around and looked at them, and I think there are some really interesting things going on, and that's part of the reason why I make the recommendation that a targeted study interviewing residents about their health status and some of their preferences might turn out some really interesting things.
And your point, too, about aging in place, we have some people who have lived there for a very long time, people of all age groups, and there's a sense of safety and security that something happens in the middle of the night and you have a bear breaking into your kitchen, your neighbors come to your rescue, or, if you need your outside plants watered while you go on vacation, there's a neighbor who's always there to volunteer to help. And I think you find that in any of these tight-knit neighborhoods that really are created out of trailer courts or mobile home parks.
And I think that's a really important point about healthy communities, that having a full age range is key to having a healthy community. Okay. So no net loss is a concept that's been raised certainly in your earlier work sessions, and it remains a key and strong recommendation of the HIA. Land tenure has also been talked about to some extent, and as Karen said, by buying Phillips, you've taken a really important first step in reducing those risks that are unique to mobile home residents who own units but do not own the land on which their units sit, and are tenants on privately held land. So as you know very well, when those parks are sold, residents can be evicted who may have made significant investments in those units, and yet some of the units can't be moved. They may be too expensive to move, there may be nowhere to move them to, or they can be damaged in a move. So this is a pretty fraught situation for people, and I would join Karen in commending you for reducing that risk for people. Health studies do show that when residents of parks are evicted, they may lose a lot of equity in those units. They may have to leave a community where they have jobs, social networks, family, health care, all kinds of support networks. And case studies in Florida and Texas have documented health impacts following these kinds of evictions that include things like depression, anxiety, insomnia, substance use, health impacts associated with homelessness, hospitalizations, and worse. In contrast, in mobile home parks where residents own their lot or a share in a co-op, the economic and social advantages that may accrue from this may have really significant positive impacts on health over time. There are, again, not a lot of studies, but the ones there are show that benefits seem to include things like lower fees, faster home sales, easier access to fixed-rate financing, higher appreciation, which is both good and bad, greater perception of control and stability in lot rents and governance, and less concern about displacement, and possibly more civic engagement and community investment as well, all of which things can also have very positive health benefits over time. So transition, Bob is on this. He's got it in the works. I would emphasize here, though, the connection to senior services. I think sort of reinvigorating those ties might be helpful, and people might find that there are services they can take advantage of that they may not have been. Okay, so because we don't know much about the condition of many of the Phillips units, which ones can or can't be moved, may or may not stay on site. We also don't know too much about the kinds of strategies people are using for heating and cooling, just that it appears there's a mix of different kinds of fuels being used, electricity, wood burning, propane, et cetera. As you move forward, I think it's probably important to keep in mind indoor air quality, as well as the other health impacts, and there are many documented associated with substandard housing. Probably don't need to, I think this is also on Bob's mind, I know it is, how to address this when it becomes clear which units may stay or people may want to move on site. At that point is probably a good time to try to address some of these issues. Okay, community quality. So this recommendation overlaps a little bit with the recommendation around land tenure, and what I'm suggesting is that it may be pretty interesting to learn more about the implications of lot sizes and home sizes that would be accommodated on different size lots, the benefits, again, of APCHA style resident-owned community versus a ROC style co-op, and in terms of kind of long-run issues, investment, gentrification, community stability, et cetera, and again, retiree needs.
Can you just, so the rest of the board understands, ROC style co-op? Because I speak with them every time I go to the conference, so.
Yeah, so this is owning a share in a community as opposed to carving out specific lots. And ROC also helps with a number of things. My understanding is that they will help a community kind of get up and running for a period of time, maybe as long as 10 years after the initiation. And they also may help with financing, so that as the residents, as a communal group, want to buy a property, ROC may step in and help with the financing if there's a gap between what a private landowner would want for a community versus what the residents as a group can afford.
And they're a national entity, and I think they've done a project in Boulder. Mm-hmm. So they have some.
Resident-owned community.
And so they have ties here in Colorado, and they're up to speed on Phillips, and every time I go there, I'm like, okay, what's going on? So it's a great organization, as far as I can tell.
They do have an office in Boulder. It's under a different name, which is escaping me at the moment.
Thistle.
Thank you, yes.
I was curious about ROC also. Is it a nonprofit or a for-profit organization?
You know, I don't know. I think it's for-profit, I think, but that would be right off the top.
It's a network of 9 regional nonprofit affiliates.
Well, it's not. It is nonprofit. Be surprised. But Thistle is kind of the name that came with it in the Boulder area.
Okay.
Yeah, so that particular model is, I think what's being referred to here, though, is more the co-op, where the underlying property and infrastructure, the horizontal infrastructure is owned in a co-op, and then residents would own shares in that cooperative and sell shares in that cooperative under a certain agreement. Rock is one model of that. but
Right,
there
and
are
it's
others.
kind of like in a way, a property management company of sorts at times, so that has broader abilities.
So in terms of health impacts, as John just described, if the community, if everyone living in a community has a stake in what that community looks like overall by owning a share, then some of the health impacts that have been studied suggest that, that kind of community involvement then that arises from owning that stake in the community mean that, people want community investment, but they want to do it carefully. So they're managing what their costs are while setting long-term goals for the community, and people are pitching in. They've got a bunch of videos online.
I don't know if we need to get into this detail now, but maybe a question to be answered. I'm curious if, in this style of co-op, if 100% of the shares are owned amongst all the residents, or if 70% of the shares get divided among the residents and the remaining proportion get held by someone else.
I don't know what their model is.
I don't know.
That's a good-
That is a good question. My understanding has been that it's 100%, but I
But it could
can't swear to
transition
that.
into that as people were able to purchase. Maybe they're a good starter and continuer for a certain period of time to get people up, to get the project up and running.
Right.
Stable.
So this second recommendation on this slide just, again, suggests continued engagement, continuing to learn about community identity, sense of place. I know Bob is working on this going forward, and Laura is sensitive to it in site planning. Same is true of the first two items here. This is a very wordy slide. The third item here, Karen and I have spoken in the past about a noise study. Again, it's not clear that noise is bothersome to people out there, but if levels are high, it could be important to consider the feasibility of noise mitigation in any new structures, or programs for retrofitting that may happen. Say you have a weatherization program for some of the units that may stay on site. Perhaps it could be possible to consider noise at the same time. Again, coordinating with senior services to learn about their requirements for serving Phillips in terms of the senior van. My understanding from Chad was that it was a matter of road maintenance and plowing that sort of impeded their ability to so that should be easy to fix, right? So it's not all of transportation, but it's a critical piece. It's a way to move forward in terms of transportation. So finally, Phillips may provide opportunities for you to explore how you can further pursue meeting the needs of residents aging in place in terms of sustainable design, which I know you've discussed, and in making connections to other county policies, such as, again, perhaps there's a place here to think about your climate action plan. Maybe that ranch house serves many functions, including potentially a cooling or a warming center, among many other things that have been discussed for that. Okay, so the broader implications of the Phillips HIA then, I think that it's fair to say that it's sharpened the focus on health and on elements that might not typically have been considered in the land use planning process, and that it has elevated conversation about the social determinants of health. That initiating the use of a health lens in county projects is something you're doing with this first HIA. And that as a case study, Phillips is a place to work out at a small scale some of the issues that you're dealing with broadly in the county. So it seems to bring up many of the kinds of issues that you've been talking about in the county overall, such as housing instability and aging in place, the APSHA conversations, access to health care and mental health didn't come up as much. They're kind of sometimes transportation issues, particularly for people aging in place. And then the connections to climate change and energy efficiency. And I would add here that the rural context, how HIA plays out in this rural context, is important because the solutions need to fit the context. You can't just take a bunch of information that comes from urban HIAs and implement it here. So it's important to continue, as of course you are automatically being cognizant of this rural context. One thing that I think is interesting about HIA and beneficial is that I think it has the potential to have kind of a snowball effect because health is so interconnected to so many other sectors. When you intervene in one key area, such as in housing instability, lots of other good things can grow out of that over time. Small businesses, community stability, intergenerational connections, access to healthful foods, all those kinds of things have occurred in other places where housing stability was kind of the entry point. And I think it's also fair to say that HIA can support a kind of thinking that can bridge gaps and find ways that are creative and synergistic to meet goals that may seem to be, on the face of it, conflicting. So just to sort of give you an example from the Phillips HIA, I know that there's been discussion about whether or not to allow development to occur on those sunny open benches, the ag fields. And yet, of course, that's also what people are calling Bob from Phillips and saying, you know, this is where we want to live because we don't want to live in the darkest part of the canyon where it's dark all winter. So in the face of it, you have two competing priorities. You've got a long-held policy around preserving ag lands, and you've got a need of people to live where they can live in the sunshine, which is not irrelevant to health. You know, there's seasonal affective disorder and those kinds of impacts. So instead of thinking about these as an either or, I think it's possible to think in HIA terms about trying to bring these things together and figure out, is there a way to creatively solve both these things at the same time? One thing that came to mind to me in listening to your earlier conversations about this was a lot of developments that could be looked at for ideas in Northern Europe that are designed as agricultural cooperative kinds of communities. So perhaps part of this site is designed from the start as a place that supports agriculture. Maybe it's not grazing land or the kind of agriculture you might have in mind, but maybe it's small-scale agriculture in the form of community gardens or even individual gardens worked into the site plan right from the start. So just a thought, but I think that my point here, the larger point is that I think that this kind of thinking can get those creative wheels going. So that's all I had today, unless you've got questions for me.
Patty?
I have to tell you, this was extremely helpful. And I think you two should be speaking at the conference in Portland. And I might suggest that for next year's conference. I just think just the way it integrates, you know, the land, the choice of the word lands and focus, I think it really will help us in making decisions on the broader concept. It's just not a safe porch, it's an access, it's a meeting place, it's fresh air in the evening, it's not just how you get in and out of your house kind of a decision. And I think that's important when you're looking at the overall picture of what we're trying to do there. It's a way to provide and maintain affordable housing, but it's really a quality of life and a sense of security and stability for families that are there now and families who will be there in the future. And I think that's key.
Kelly and then Steve.
Thanks. I guess I'm just thinking about that sort of end point of like the real health measurement, I guess. And so I'm wondering, you know, has anything been contemplated about, you know, how are we measuring levels of stress here, or is that being contemplated, or how are we measuring improvements in real health factors. I mean, I don't know, back pain, headaches, I don't know, just things that I think are that direct question of someone's physical health is connected to these decisions.
You're going to start with the sample, the population size.
So that's an excellent question, and it is what you want to do. I think one of the outcomes from Phillips that was sort of predicted right from the start is that the difficulty was going to be the small sample size. And even if we had, say, every single person out there respond to the survey and had all their health and income data and everything else that might normally go into understanding the health status of a population, it's too small of a group to be statistically significant anyway. And then say 5 people leave and 5 other people come, they could throw it off. 2 people with some unusual condition could make the statistics look really odd. So it's too small to be relevant in the typical way we think about HIA statistics. If you're talking about a neighborhood in Denver, you may have thousands of people living in one part of the neighborhood, and you can see real differences between that neighborhood and another neighborhood, and the kinds of vulnerabilities that might exist in particular neighborhoods, and how those vulnerabilities could be related to things like a highway slicing through a neighborhood. This is on my mind, having just driven through again the widening of I-70 through those neighborhoods. So I think the next step that could be really useful here, and again, I know I'm suggesting yet another study, but you could broaden the data that you've got that might be relevant to Phillips in particular by doing a survey of everybody living in mobile home parks. Maybe it's everybody in APSHA housing, but this is a smaller place to start. Mm-hmm. So you'd learn a lot about what could be useful and desirable at Phillips, but you'd also end up with, and I don't know how many people that is, but it's at least a bigger. So what we're trying to do is create a step down from the level of data that you have, which is county level and census tract level. And from there to 58 people living at Phillips is a big gap. So it's really hard to answer your question about what are the impacts without having another step in between.
There's probably 430 plus or minus units in the 5 trailer courts.
Which may still be too small of a
Yeah,
sample
it's pretty
size for
small.
population health, but
I don't know how many people, but units, so maybe 1,000 plus people.
there may be more opportunities as APSHA thinks through strategic planning, information systems. I know that that's something that infrastructure is being developed now, but that is a population of thousands, which does start to get you to maybe being able to collect some meaningful population health metrics, Kelly. That may be something based on the county's experience, because this is the first time we've really used a health impact assessment model. And I think scalability is something we've learned in the process, which is good. And I think we also see the potential of the information to inform other programs, whether it be case management needs in the housing program versus physical needs or what have you. So that may be something that can't be built overnight, but maybe an opportunity to start introducing the concepts and building on the infrastructure to get at those metrics, whether it be, I don't know what they are, because I'm not.
Well, and I guess I'm
HIA
just sort of
expert.
drawing an assumption, not being an HIA expert, that this type of tool relies on statistical kind of data-driven questions as opposed to a qualitative case study type of approach.
It can really combine those two really effectively. There are some really interesting qualitative things that have been done. For example, in Commerce City, there was a project that was going to impact roadways and some things where there are kids walking to school. So I think it's called Adam City High School. Kids walk along a street that's got just huge level of traffic, and they wanted to learn about those impacts and what it felt like as a kid to do that. So they gave cameras to the kids and had them photograph barriers to to getting to school and learn a lot about their places. You have to step out into the street because there's so many poles in the way and all sorts of things like that. So even at a really small scale, qualitative data can be really impactful. In the Phillips case, I was hoping we'd get more of that. I think you have opportunities maybe to do that down the line as people are less concerned about having, again, a roof over their heads. It was hard for Bob to get people to finish the survey and to answer, those quality of life questions. I think they'll get there later, but they weren't there then. And for good reason, it makes sense.
Establishment of trust as we move forward.
Steve?
I jotted down some notes or comments as we were going on. First of all, in terms of the homeowners getting to own their own land under their trailers, I think that's really essential, and I can see that in your report, that just having the stability of owning their own land must do wonders for people's mental health, to feel secure finally, like this isn't going to be taken away from me. I was considering the question about APSHA guidelines, and some of the people don't know whether they apply or would qualify for APSHA guidelines. And I would just take the APSHA guidelines off the table, for at least for the people who are living there. Whoever is living there is grandfathered in. They don't have to qualify for any APSHA guidelines. What I would rather see as a guideline for the whole community would be to have it resident occupied. We don't want to have it become rich people buying a cheap second home close to Aspen, leaving it empty and not living there and just coming on vacation. To me, would be not what we want to have happen. And if we did the resident occupied, I think that would solve that. The debris flow area, walking through Glenwood Springs, there's a major gully going right down through the middle of the residential part of Glenwood Springs. And there are houses just as close to that gully as there are in Phillips Trailer Park. And so I know the people who are in the homes that might be affected by having to move from there are probably worried that they're going to lose their spot. But I think we need to look at how they handled it in Glenwood Springs, and could we do the same thing at Phillips just to make it safer. And if there is a little flash flood come down through there, how do we handle it compared to how they do it in Glenwood Springs? In terms of Highway 82 noise, and I'm really curious if all the cars going on Highway 82 are all electric vehicles. What's going to be the noise level of the highway? I'm sure there will be some noise, but probably a whole lot less. In 20 years, the highway noise thing might be largely a thing of the past as we transition to more electric vehicles.
That's a lovely thought.
Just a thought. That would be a blessing for anybody living close to the highway, or like people in Satank in Carbondale. They get a huge amount of highway noise because it bounces off the cliff there and then affects the whole community of Satank. So something like that could really help at Phillips Trailer Park. So those are my quick perceptions of things that I thought of right then.
Good information, thank you.
When you talked about trying to expand the universe in terms of health assessments, it'd be interesting, maybe it's a simpler way to do this, is we know we've got already 4 existing trailer parks that have have ownership. It'd be interesting just to sort of see maybe some simple questions like, what do you like about it? What don't you like? What works? What doesn't work? Just a few things, because I mean, you talk about Phillips as being a case study. Well, I think we have some case studies in place with all the existing trailer parks. It's not like we're starting from scratch. If we were starting from scratch, then I think you could really start to address a lot of these issues. But you're already dealing with trailers in place, where they're positioned, where they're aged, where they've been at. So it's kind of a mishmash in a little bit. So I think utilizing the knowledge we can gain from our existing trailer parks might help in terms of how we view transitioning the Phillips mobile home park.
Can I add to that? George is right on the mark. Plus, you're more likely to get, there's a lot of people who just don't want to answer questions because they're afraid of what it will do with the information. And I think the general questions like George asking will give us some idea as to the home ownership, the security there, rather than asking them their income and their job capacity versus what they like about where they live and what they think could be improved and how they, and also to emphasize in asking those questions, which I think might be something we want to look at doing, is to make sure that it's clear that we're doing this because we have our 5th trailer court at Phillips, and we want you to help us to do the right thing for those people. So I think that would increase their level of competence and security in helping us out, and not just render people, I'm not answering it, it's the government coming and AP's just going to use it against us, kind of attitude and mentality.
I guess on that note, so I believe that Lisa's tenure with DHM is coming to a close. Would this be something that the board would want us to pursue, is to do some sort of assessment of the other parks or questionnaire?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want this to get to be another huge study. You know, I think I'd rather have our dollars go into
The project.
for Phillips. So if there's a sort of a simple survey we could send out with some basic questions through the other trailer parks would be great, but I don't want to see a 50-page report.
So maybe bring us back some suggestions and we can make decisions.
Okay, sure.
In other words, let's talk.
I think it needs to be fleshed out. The things that I've remarked on is that, you know, the study here it's pretty intense. It's a very small sample size, as you pointed out. We're asking questions of them that probably haven't been asked elsewhere. We didn't get very far for the reasons that people are concerned about privacy and all that. But a lot of these are questions of economic insecurity that could go far beyond. I think other trailer courts isn't enough. It's like it would be part of our entire employee housing stock, maybe even some of the free market housing stock. Not everybody lives in a mansion and has a trust fund. There's economic insecurity throughout the community. So how do we, if we're looking for equity and equality, you know, trying to understand those things, how far do we look? How narrow do we focus? Because if we focus just with a laser on that one little community, I'm not sure it's really serving the entire community. So it asks, of course, it creates more questions than answers. It's certainly an interesting exercise, is worth doing. It's good to get a picture on it, but I'm trying to think, well, what could we learn from other trailer courts as opposed to the affordable housing stock as a whole? You know, what value would that information be? We're not talking just about trailers or mobile homes. We're talking about people at a certain, you know, level of economics insecurity, or perhaps proximity to each other, or, you know, these various determinants for what makes things good and bad about being in a dense neighborhood, or an older neighborhood, or a vulnerable neighborhood in some way. So it's like, I don't think I'd be ready to say, yes, let's launch into another study yet. But you've opened a door, which is an interesting one, and it's clearly we have to look and see, you know, where this is going. I'm just not sure how the scope of it yet. Yeah, I keep thinking that I just kept saying, you know, this is just one component in a larger, much larger system. So how do we get a view of how the entire community is feeling, and is that important? in this case, or is this just about Phillips and that's all we're going to care about here?
Right.
I think that the assurance that we look for from the Phillips community is that, uncertain future, it's like, well, boy, that's a question you could ask everybody in town. But the whole point of the exercise was to ensure that their home isn't going to go away anytime soon, and hopefully we're not creating a scenario that's less certain than the one they faced before the sale. Everything else is still up in the air, but they know they've got a roof over their heads at this point, right? Maybe that's the assurance and comfort we can give them now as we go forward. But I'm not sure what else. It'll take a while for us to understand that. So I really appreciate what you're doing here. Other comments?
Good, thanks.
I think
Again.
that's a lot to think about. Thank you for preparing that great presentation. And really want to go back and look at all your slides again. It's good stuff, and really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to work on this project. It's
Thanks.
been very interesting.
It's exciting, actually, isn't it?
Okay, we're moving right along. We're on to our next. We've got a bit of we could go to executive now.
Yeah, Greg, I think that this would be a good time to take a break. We have an interview scheduled for 4:45. She may be in a little bit early. We'll let Elaine know
Okay.
to come get us if she gets here a little bit early.
Should we take a
Grassroots
10-minute
will be
break?
taking a break probably till 4:40, 4:45.
No, we're gonna go right up to exec, aren't we?
Straight to exec? Okay, that's
It's
fine.
up to you guys.
Great, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Karen, and Nan, thanks for coming in. Okay, grassroots are off till, we're thinking 4:30, 4:45. Okay, we're back. All right, this is our work session on Tuesday, the 20th of August. And we have an interview for our Board of Health, right, with Linda Vieira. Vieira?
Correct,
Vieira. Great. Thank you for coming in. And I think typically we just start with questions.
And for those members of the public who don't know who Linda Vieira is, because she's been part of births of babies for almost everybody in this community for how many years?
I delivered babies for 35 years and have not for 11 years. I did women's health care.
So anybody over the age of 11,
Right.
Linda
exactly.
knows who you are, knows your parents probably.
We had to go to Denver, but otherwise we would have.
So we are excited to have you come before us, and thank you for having interest in this board. It's an amazing board, and it's in its second year. So it's new, it's transitioning, it's evolving, it's creative. And I think you now have time to commit to this.
Yes, since I'm not on call and delivering babies, I have a little more time, yes.
So is there any particular interest you may have in the Board of Health?
Well, I have an interest in all aspects, but I'm particularly interested in women's health care and women and children. My master's degree is in maternal child health, so that's my main interest, but I'm interested in all of it, all aspects of health for families. So,
Perfect.
mhm.
Great. Again, thank you.
You're welcome.
A question from Kelly?
Is there a particular health issue that you see as, requiring some prompt attention?
Well, with all the news media focusing on mental health and having seen that as a problem with clients of mine, I think that is one of my major interests is mental health. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Steve?
So Linda, all of us used to be the Board of Health, the county commissioners, with the addition of one city council person and one town Snowmass village person were the Board of Health. And then we reconstituted with only one commissioner, Greg is the one serving now.
Uh-huh.
And then we opened it up to members of the public, most or all of whom have some expertise in one area of health or other. So it's really a little bit more a body of experts now in public health issues.
Right.
Being able to weigh in based on their own personal experience.
Yeah.
So your record speaks for itself, I think, a long history of working in health issues.
Right. 41 years with community health.
Yeah.
And 42 here in Aspen.
But is there any area where you see a lack in the community, something the community should be addressing that we are not, that you would want to take the initiative to have the Board of Health weigh in on that?
Well, like I said, I think the mental health issue and addiction, I think, is a real issue. And from what I hear, there's a major problem in our school system with addiction. And I think that is one area that could be looked at and perhaps addressed in a more comprehensive way for young adults that are experimenting. So that's another major interest of mine. Yeah, and I see a need for sure. Yeah.
Can I tag on to that?
Sure.
And to expand that, what we're seeing, and we've just been doing some research on, and we're going to have a ballot question on in November about smoking tax,
Right.
cigarette tobacco tax.
Yeah.
Are you aware of the numbers, and since Karen's here, of kids in our school system that are vaping? And since that's kind of a new for the older generation, that's a focus. And how do you have any thoughts on vaping or flavored tobacco?
Well, I think that the tobacco companies are trying to get our younger people to partake in vaping, and they of course deny that, but I think that's a reality, and I think that's a current trend in our young people. It's the thing to do, vaping. But I don't know a whole lot about it. No, I don't. Other than I don't think it's a good thing.
Well, we're all kind of on a learning curve about it, and its
Yeah.
addiction capacity is enormous.
Right.
George?
Yeah, Linda, thanks for applying. I'm just curious, how did you hear about this opening? And I know when we first formed this, we had a lot of applicants. I'm just curious why you weren't in the first round of applications.
I probably didn't know about the first round, but one of my book group friends is Ann Mullins, and she approached me and asked me if I'd be interested. And since I do have more time now to actually help, I thought that this would be a good time to apply and serve.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So, kind of tagging on to Patty's question about the vaping.
Yeah.
We have decided we're bringing forward a ballot question this fall that would greatly increase the nicotine tax, basically, and the tax on cigarettes and nicotine products, including all the vaping products. So it would be in line, what we're proposing would be exactly in line with what the city of Aspen passed.
Right.
But do you have any feelings about having a tax increase on the
I'm in
taxpayers?
favor of it.
The Board
I'm
of Health
definitely in
brought it-
favor.
Brought it
Yeah.
forward to us. So
Right.
Just to make sure you'd be on the same page with the Board of Health.
Oh, yeah.
Do you agree with that?
I definitely
that
agree
step
with
of
it.
increasing
Yeah,
the tax?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the last year, I'm trying to think of the various topics we've discussed. One is, sewage, septic systems, standards.
We do it all.
New state standards, things that are, we've
Emissions.
We've talked about emissions. We've talked about cloud seeding.
I talked about that on the health.
Cloud seeding. That was one of the issues that came up on the effects of, silver iodide and trace amounts. And we've talked about certainly the vaping and tobacco, the health consequences of vaping that might not be tied to addiction, but just maybe lung disease.
Sure.
Which
Yeah.
is hearing a lot of news about that lately. I was looking at, I've seen you've worked with all ages, which is great. You have you speak Spanish, I guess, is that right?
Yeah, I'm pretty fluent in Portuguese, and I have a Portuguese version of Spanish.
Okay, well, all right. Also looking at your effects of high altitude on pregnancy. I thought that's fascinating. Clearly, it makes so much sense here. I think one of the topics that if we haven't discussed it, we probably will. But we talk about we're in the suicide belt here, there's often it comes up, but I haven't seen much lately about the effects of altitude on the suicide rate. Could that be a component in the higher suicide rates we're seeing here? Could altitude and maybe sleep apnea or something have an impact?
Right. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention is we've got one other a board member who is a former CEO of an airline, involved in an airline and maybe a pilot. I don't think he's probably been on health boards. Brent, I'm not sure if he has public health experience. Probably not much, but so he's one other layperson like myself.
Yeah.
And the rest are, doctors, medical professionals. We have our advisor, Dr. Kim Levin. Thank you, Kimberly Levin. And the one who's leaving right now is
Chris is gone.
Chris Miller, Dr.
You know
Miller.
Chris Miller's moved to.
She's
New
moving to
Hampshire.
Vermont or New Hampshire.
New Hampshire.
Yeah, and
They're
so
gone.
so they're gone. Oh,
Yeah.
too bad. Yeah, it was great to have her there.
Yeah.
And so we've got mostly medical professionals, and then we have Christina King from Aspen Strong has been participating, and I'll think of whoever
And
else.
Mullins is still on the board.
Torrey has come in. Ann's a second now. Yeah, and Ann is the alternate. So it's a mix of mostly medical professionals and a few of us who are trying to keep up. And we meet, is it probably 4 times a year plus a retreat, and then maybe special meetings if there's an important thing coming up. Like
Yeah.
some of us are probably going to choose to, work on campaigns or, whatever else is there.
Sure.
One thing I want to bring up that we have in our meetings, on our minutes of our meetings, is we always have like what do we call it at the beginning? Was it the big ideas or the There was something at the beginning. If you have something you want to bring forward, hot topics, maybe it's just so that you have something, a burning issue.
Right.
It's not all driven by the staff or
Yeah.
by the county to you. It's,
Uh-huh.
we're looking to the community to see what's important. And,
Sure.
And so just so you know, that's part of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Did we
great
have-
that you come in to apply.
One other applicant
We have one other right now that I know of.
we interviewed, and I
Haven't
missed it?
interviewed, not yet.
No, it's upcoming.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
I don't think so. I
Get
think
along with
that,
medical people?
yeah.
Or just little one?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I could be of help. I think I have enough experience in my lifetime that I might add to the group.
It certainly seems like it. Would you be willing to go to Denver to testify and join us if we go down to be
Sure.
involved in it? Just every now and then that happens, or there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's a fun board. I have to say, I enjoy the board meetings. I enjoy, Marky Butler's on with, of course, medical professional as well as a Snowmass Council mayor. And so it's a pretty good group. I have to say, I like the meetings. Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Thank
We
you.
give
Good
it
to
some
see you.
time. We've got to interview one more person, then we'll
Yeah.
take a couple weeks and we'll make a decision.
That's
and
fine.
We'll be in touch.
All right.
Thanks for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming in.
Sure.
Did we have any other committee appointments we needed to make, or did we, just want to make sure we have a clean slate
Reminder.
on
There
positions?
is one for the
P&Z.
P&Z, there's one more person who's going to be.
So we've got one more applicant.
Steve.
Yeah, so we'll bring those back.
Okay.
Okay, so that's it for us for the day. We probably ought to clear out in time for P&Z to get set up. Okay, we're done.
All
Thanks,
right, thanks,
Grassroots. We're
Grassroots.
done for the day.
Thank you, Amy.
Just a reminder, meeting tomorrow, 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock tomorrow.
And thank you for having it tomorrow at 11 o'clock. I appreciate that.